Colton, is this on your channel or the Hoppean channel?
My channel.
Okay.
Did you tweet it out?
Hello, and we are live. I'm Colton. I'm here with Yenzo, Yeezus, and Jared. You guys want to say hello? So I don't have a something to play in the foreground or the background, sorry, because I haven't had time to do that. So this might get copyright stricken again because Esso is using a bunch of copyright images with his voice. So hopefully that doesn't happen this time. It happened 2 times last week.
How very odd.
Yeah. Apparently Esso's also been getting copyright stricken because of these copyright images and videos he's playing. Also, Esso got very, very mad at our live stream last week. He got mad that we were making fun of him. So, you know, that's always...
Oh, no offense.
I won't do that anymore.
But, yeah. Also, Echo. So, this week we're doing secessionism. And... yeah, I don't quite understand why they think the things they do, but maybe we can parse that out with the gang here. So, let's continue. Also, yeah, Esso also did not like us, well, me calling him illiterate. And he also didn't like the context of, like, saying Esso's an LMA and that type of stuff. So, it's always fun when someone gets mad for when you call them what they say they are. Would be like going to Jared and be like, "You're a right-wing separatist," and then Jared just reading all over the place.
Only I can call myself that.
Anyways, also, since Jared is the right-wing separatist, I think he's gonna enjoy this video. At least this live.
Enjoy is a odd word to use.
Well, I was about to say I will at least enjoy this live stream.
Maybe, yeah.
Okay, I guess without further ado, let's just get into the secessionism video. And I just realized I'm not showing you guys the video, so let me fix that. Okay, and that's fixed. You can just have to click on live.
Excellent.
In America, progressives and Marxists use the electoral process, specifically the Democrat Party in the United States, as a means of advancing their agenda of making marginal adjustments to the status quo of government domination in favor of their marginal preferences. Similarly, an anarchist philosopher should have a strategy for achieving their desired political, or in this case anti-political, goals. Otherwise, their ideas are just words. As such, Hoppe has embraced the strategy of secessionism. Secessionism is supporting political movements for political bodies to separate from and no longer be under the political jurisdiction of another political body they were previously subject to, typically because the smaller government is better able to meet the interests of its ruling class better than the government it's seceding from. The secessionists sees the act of secession itself as a positive, and will generally support them irregardless of the movement's actual motivations or principles. For Hoppe, the status quo of nation-state borders is a homeostasis of the various ruling classes in power expanding their jurisdictions as far as they do not conflict with other political powers that could militarily threaten them.
I thought it was very interesting that he used the word homeostasis.
I can't believe he calls him Hop.
Oh,
Yeah.
you
You're just joining us. Yeah, that is something that we addressed in the last stream.
yeah,
Calls him Pop. Yeah.
yeah. Well, Filthy does.
Right.
I think Esso actually gets his name correct. So
I mean, that's okay. It's just like, all right, a little bit of research, just a little.
well,
You know?
Okay, so chat for reference. Yinzo here does not know pretty much anything about this stream. What Esso's like, what Filthy's like. So they've been
Zero.
They've been researching this set of videos for over a year, and they've actually taken time out of creating content to create these videos.
Oh, all right. Well, appreciate the effort, at least, I guess.
Yeah, but it's also just interesting that they don't even know his name when they've been researching him for you. You think that would be like one of the first things you look up is like what's this dude's name?
Yeah, it's really strange. But all right, I will try not to get hung up on that.
Okay. Yeah, no, it's just interesting to use the word homeostasis for there. Not quite sure why. But anyways, let's move on.
The side effect has been the absorption and assimilation of multiple different demographics, with mutually exclusive and even outright conflicting cultural norms, put in proximity under a system of common legislation and common borders by the rulers. While
Does anyone have anything to comment there?
I didn't catch what he just said. Can you play it back?
Yeah, so let's go back.
for Hop, the status quo of nation-state borders is a homeostasis of the various ruling classes in power expanding their jurisdictions as far as they do not conflict with other political powers that could militarily threaten them. The side effect has been the absorption and assimilation of multiple different demographics, with mutually exclusive and even outright conflicting cultural norms, put in proximity under a system of common legislation and common borders by the rulers. While
Okay, so that's they're obviously talking about Hoppe here, where he talks about the conflicts that are created as a result of state-owned property, state-owned thoroughfares, and public spaces, right? The tragedy of the commons. And that's really what Hoppe's argument is that the tragedy of the commons creates these conflicts. This is a very basic idea in capitalist-style Austrian economics, that if you have common space is less cared for, and thus it gets destroyed because there's no owner, right? And as a result, there's actually what is seen and what is not seen, what is unseen on this too, which is that other just property owners are thus infringed upon as well because of that tragedy of the commons that occurs. If your neighbor has a fire in his house, you're not unaffected, right? So this is the genesis of this.
Well, it's not even just that it's common property. It's that the common property is kept from becoming private property, and it's not like common ownership in terms of like a contract,
right?
Where there's definite property rights. It's just the entire
state property,
right? It's state property, but because yeah. Anyways, because the state is quote unquote owned by society, it's all society's property. So society has the right to it, but what does that mean for each individual?
Right. And what does it mean for people? Who has the better claim, right? And I'm sure we'll get into that here in a minute.
Legislative fiat increases the likelihood that hostile groups come into contact. For example, the welfare state.
Also, just to put this in what I think he was talking about, I think he was actually just talking about nation states growing their borders.
Yeah, it sounded awfully like he was saying, well, I don't know. I don't want to hold up the stream on that, but
okay.
Yeah, I didn't immediately absorb what he just said. It was a kind of intentionally overinflated, but anyway.
Yep.
Likelihood that hostile groups come into contact. For example, the welfare state in Europe and the US being a financial incentive for third world immigrants to settle into the West, exacerbated by open borders policies, such as the non-enforcement of current immigration legislation. Forced integration, illustrated by such measures as busing, rent controls, anti-discrimination laws, and free immigration, invariably creates tension, hatred, and conflict. In contrast, voluntary separation leads to social harmony and peace.
Okay, so pause there.
Based?
Can you put it back on that quote?
Yeah.
So this is just inherently true. You force people together that don't like each other, and they're going to fight. You bus people into neighborhoods that are different than others. There's going to be social conflict there, and this happened. Like, it literally happened. Like in the '60s, and even now, there are busing schemes still that go on today that move people from inner cities to the larger outlying counties, usually from one demographic to another, right? And that creates conflict. It creates tension, and people get angry. It can ultimately destroy those other communities when you're moving those groups into other places. And this is what they call now white flight, right? So how does anyone believe that the social phenomenon that is observable is not applicable to larger social groups, right? How does anyone not believe that that's the case?
It is absolutely 100% observable in many places across history and now, like you said. Like, I mean, like, look at the refugee crisis in England and France, or Britain and France. I mean, there are literally, like, I know it's some sort of right-wing conspiracy, well, what they can say that it is, but I mean, like, real places where, like, natives can't go because of refugee-run zones, and they have their own established norms and cultures, and they will protect it, and
Right.
it creates some sort of tension in a land where there didn't need to be.
Right. I also would like to point out that something we didn't point out last week that I think I should put out this week is almost all of their citations or things that they're talking about are strictly things from the early 90s, when it's not like Hoppe has stopped talking about this since like 1993 or since Rothbard died in 96. So they're
going to take basically part of Hoppe's argument, or not the evolved section of his argument, and then try and play it against each other? Is that what you're trying to get at?
Oh, no, they're not going to play against each other. They, as far as I can tell, so far they haven't acknowledged an argument that he's made since like 1996. So that's
for those who don't know on the stream that watch this and don't know Hoppe's only gotten better. His arguments have sharpened and his critiques have hardened. So
right, and that's why last week when Hoppe, when I got a clip of Hoppe talking about argumentation ethics, it was completely different to how Esso and Filthy did. Was almost precisely because the Hoppe clip was from like 2015, 2016, and what they were talking about was something that was written in 92, I believe.
Yeah.
So, you know, you would expect this in a philosopher that is actually like not lazy, is that what he developed during his 30s, when he's in his 60s, he has a better argument. It's more fleshed out. So, anyways, I just thought that was very interesting to point out because, yeah, that's, you know, it's just at least it's mind-boggling to me that they would spend so much, you know, basically spend all their time researching 90s Hoppe and 80s Hoppe. but nothing since. Anyways.
Maybe they're obsessed with the vaporwave like we are.
Yeah, I mean, they do have some cool aesthetics. I will give them that. Also, I'm hoping that that map video that they just played is not copyrighted. So, anyways, let's move on.
In contrast, voluntary separation leads to social harmony and peace. Or people free to set rent, discriminate from their property, or choose who they do or do not allow into their societies, people would voluntarily separate. And you can see this for yourself. Go to a government school cafeteria during lunch, and you can see that the nerds sit with the nerds, the Latinos sit with the Latinos, the basketball Americans sit with each other. You get the idea.
So pause
No
right there.
Basketball Americans.
Yeah. So, yeah. This is obviously true. You can see it in nature and everywhere else. There's nothing inherently wrong with this. It is the early development of a natural aristocracy and a natural order. It is the high school is an interesting example, and one I don't necessarily totally agree with, because you're operating within the confines of a what is this essentially a state, right? Which is the school. Beyond that, you got that's what it is. That's what's created.
Right.
Literal prisons for children.
Yeah, it's a day.
Right.
It's a day prison for children, and therefore you're gonna have some forced association. Like, I know many
Correct.
times in school I had to work with team members I didn't really want to. I was put in the class. I didn't get to choose,
Right.
necessarily what it was, and they were like, "Oh yeah, you have to work with these people," and I was like, "These people are retards." So
Yeah, well, that just helps. That just proves the natural order more, because that's the top-down, the teacher forcing groups together to work together. But then the example of during lunchtime, when you're on your own, or recess, you're on your own free association, you do see cliques naturally form that together on in a very spontaneous, like bottom-up way. That wouldn't form the same. They wouldn't form the same groups, like if it was being assigned and they were trying to like integrate everyone.
Right, and
evenly.
that idea of that spontaneous and natural order, there is also a pecking order in school, right? There just is. One gets formed as a result of these groups, and as a result, you have groups that are seen as higher status, and this is what Hoppe would consider a natural aristocracy, right? Again, this is not a perfect analogy, because you're working within the confines of a limited scope with a limited view where you're basically in a forced state of association most of the time. But we can look at it as an example of that, and as a result, I don't think that most of the time you can say that there is all that much conflict as if these people were forced together all the time, right? Because I can remember, I mean, as old as I am, when I was in high school, that typically these groups stayed away from each other. That was the whole point, right? So
yeah. So not only did they stay away from each other, they stayed away from each other, and that kept conflict down. But can you imagine if, like, based on your student number, they would determine who you would hang out with?
yeah, and that's interesting as well, because how many times did you guys ever see a fight where the fight started as a result of these people being in their own groups, or did most of the fights start because of something that happened when those kids were forced together in the same environment?
Outside,
I have countless examples of what you just said.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I was about to say, outside of Fight Club, there was no intra group fighting.
Yeah, so I mean, most of the time, from what I remember, most of these conflicts actually started or began in class. People were forced together to be partners, and they didn't like it. People were forced together as a result. Somebody took something from someone else. They were forced together, and then somebody looked or said something stupid to one another, and as a result, they later fought. Right, and this is reminiscent of the global scale. And I'm not trying to apply micro um, observations to macro environments. I'm not doing that directly, but there is something to be said for that when looking at it.
Right, but this is also just the whole micro going into macro. That's almost basically what we do in economics, because in, like, if you if you listen to Mises U last month, they would have said that macro isn't even really macroeconomics because there's almost nothing economics about it.
Right, and there is, and I'm not saying this for economics, but I'm saying in general, when you apply small scale group dynamics to large scale groups, they don't always scale the same way. But I do think that there is value in studying both and looking at how they compare, because if you don't, you're going to miss something. And this is going back to the basics of human action, right? Is that when you study the individual, most other things make sense, right? So that's where I'm getting at with this analogy.
Yeah. Do you guys have anything else to say?
No, you should play.
Okay.
Nobody forced them to do this. The basketball Americans sit with each other, you get the idea. Nobody forced them to do this. And far from a horrific melee, it's quite peaceful. For the most part anyways. Limiting contact to mutually beneficial arrangements. In the absence of government-imposed forced integration, these arrangements do not happen. Thus, Hoppe argues that secession enables larger varieties of demographics to peacefully coexist within their own separated societies.
It's not just demographics. Like, yes, it is demographics, but it's not demographics like Europeans versus, let's say, Orientals. It would be like Bavarians versus Hessians.
Right. Yeah. We're getting down to and you can see this online. It happens online all the time, where groups of what is considered quote unquote white separate and divide within that group. Right. And you can see the same thing with Asians. Right. It's like the Chinese and Japanese aren't going to associate together. They've got their own groups. Right. So this idea that larger demographic integration is possible either is not correct. Groups tend to be small, or at least good groups do, right? So,
And I think there's it's gonna the conflation people make between race and culture as well, where it's you could have a largely peaceful group that has extreme cultural homogeneity that's not necessarily across racial lines. And you can even use it back with the high school example of a group of jocks or athletes might be very diverse racially, but what they all value over that together is maybe a love of sports, and same thing with a group of nerds or something. They have certain things they value culturally. I mean, those are just examples, but the idea that he's gonna try to conflate this as some sort of racist angle of all I'm not exactly sure where he's going with it, but I have a feeling from him setting it up like this, he's trying to make some sort of argument that it's going to be groups segregating across racial lines or something, when it's much more important that to have a shared cultural value in what you.
Yeah,
right.
Hoppe talks about this in regards to this, and he basically calls them ethnocultures because it is a combination of ethnicity, race, culture, religion, creed, those types of things. And as a result, you can see larger groups separate, and then they separate based along each of those lines from there forward, right? So,
right. I don't know if he's going to go into the race thing, because from what I watched most of the video and he didn't, but I just wanted to point that out. It's not just demographics could be city and rural, where you have city-states surrounded by regions of farmland. And if they were different states, it would be separated along demographic lines, but it wouldn't be necessarily a different race. The people in Brandenburg wouldn't be necessarily different to the people in I just forgot the capital. of Brandenburg, but yeah, that's just Berlin, right? Berlin. So the people of Brandenburg might not necessarily be a different ethnicity to the people in Berlin, but it would still be a different demographic because Brandenburg would probably have more farmland outside of the city of Berlin than it does inside. So, okay. I also missed what Jared said, so I'm just going to assume I agree with it.
Okay.
Yeah,
Usually a good plan.
yeah, I had to go, I forgot to turn on my AC before the stream, and I just realized it as Jared was speaking, so I was like, this is a good time to just go away.
Politically
Thanks.
fragmented nation-states would, to Hop, be more harmonious. In addition, smaller, more numeric political bodies would lower the cost of emigration for their citizens, encouraging people to simply leave if they find the economic restrictions and appropriations of a political body to be too burdensome. Thus, it is argued, these political bodies have an incentive to significantly restrict the victimization of other people's property. More importantly, secession always involves increased opportunities for interregional migration, and a secessionist government is immediately confronted with the specter of emigration. To avoid the loss of its most productive subjects, it is under increased pressure to adopt comparatively liberal domestic policies by allowing more private property and imposing a lower tax and regulation burden than its neighbors.
So, overall, this is a true statement. Now, we all know that that state pressure is not absolute, right? But that doesn't really mean anything in this context. So, it is interesting that they're bringing up this point. I'm wondering where they're going with it. It looks like they're going to probably argue the counter, but I don't really see how the counter can be argued other than the fact that you might bring up, like, well, the USSR didn't do that. They threw up a border and said, well, you can't leave. Well, look at how well that happened. That worked, right? So I don't know.
And I mean, look at what's happening with California and Texas right now.
Right, it's literally
I mean,
happening in real time.
it's literally happening in real time, and people in Texas are saying, "Please stay in California."
Right? Yeah, exactly. They're saying no, don't fucking come here, right?
Yeah, and
so you've got a perfect example of what Hop was talking about with border controls, and as well as the fact that the states with the most terrible regulations and things like that, they'll see a demographic flood and not a flood, but a demographic drought where people are leaving. And this is probably, you could probably describe this like, you've got people coming into bad areas from worse areas, and then they filter up through to the better areas. And this is happening with the migrant crisis in Europe. You're seeing people from Africa totally bypass states that aren't giving them the most benefits, and they're going right to England and places like that where they're giving the most benefits, right? I want to give them speed, right?
Walking right through them.
Right, exactly. These places are safe. They walk right through Turkey. Turkey is safe. They walk right through Turkey, and they want to get to Sweden, because Sweden will give them a home. It'll give them all the welfare benefits they want, and that's where they're going, right?
Yep.
Because if you incentivize something, you get more of it.
Yep, and they want to get into Greece as well because it's their entry into the EU.
Right.
And back to the Texas-California thing, this is also another reason why democracy is so bad, is a lot of the people in Texas probably wouldn't have as much of a problem with people from California coming in if it wasn't for the fact that there's political power up for grabs, and they know that their culture can be changed through a ballot box. You know, people can get in there and vote. Like, I mean, private property would solve all this anyway, but just even having that democratic process, it creates conflict and makes you more hostile, and the culture war intensifies because when these people move in here, they're not just coming in here and just going to hang out and do their own thing. They're going to show up in November and they're going to change the laws.
Well, and this is where people always like to say, well, okay, well, democratic order or governments interfere in the economy. Well, they don't just interfere in the economy; they also interfere in people's cultures. And this is an obvious example of how a democratic order can destroy cultural differences, because if you look at California, it is going the naturally opposite direction, and it's increasing those burdensome regulations. Now, that's not to say that Hoppe is wrong. Hoppe is saying that if that state wants to survive, that's what it will do, right? Not that it will always do that.
Well, also, I think that if they adopted, the states adopted Liechtenstein's citizenship program, where you could only get citizenship of a state after 5 years and after a petition of the citizens of your county, that Texas wouldn't be having as much hostility to Californians as they do now.
Right, and that you're right, because the replacement of the native culture and the people with Californians, if you're talking about Californians moving to Texas, that's going to piss people off,
Right,
and rightfully so. And if you prevented that from happening, there's not going to be as much conflict.
Well,
and
no.
you're not. Go ahead.
It wouldn't be necessarily to keep them from coming in, but the citizenship in Liechtenstein is to keep them from voting on anything. So you have to be voted in as a citizen, as an immigrant in Liechtenstein. And I think if the states did that, people would have much less problem with Californians coming into their state, because they're either not going to be citizens or they're going to be vetted by the population.
Right, and I'm not going to argue with that. I agree with that overall, but it's really just another roadblock on the way to destruction, right? Because that's what democratic processes do, is they destroy naturally. So
Yeah. Liechtenstein has a bunch of roadblocks on the democratic process. It's almost a
right. And the more the better, right? And I'm not arguing against that at all.
Yeah. Liechtenstein is almost a pure monarchy at this point because of how much power they've given the prince.
Love it.
The basic idea is a nation ought to fragment into multiple, smaller nations across ethnic, regional, cultural, religious, sectarian, insert reason here lines. If the world doesn't blow up, then secession can be brought down to the town, to the household, and eventually the individual. Each time, fragmented powers are competing with each other for people's productivity and tax-paying power, as if they don't.
Now that's interesting, because he said that Hoppe wants to break things up along multiple lines, and then eventually down to towns, and then down to the individual. This is actually this is more the implicit secession route, where in the 90s Hoppe was actually talking about the having a city or a county just up and leave from the United States. So he's going to talk about this now, and I don't think he talks about that case throughout the rest of the video.
Yeah, and I don't think Hoppe would make the argument that the ideal situation is we're all completely atomized. And this is something that I think a lot of people don't get in the libertarian movement, is that the tendency towards atomization is not necessarily a great thing. The complete breakout of every single person into their own micro unit, where they're all self-sufficient and we're not in any kind of groups at all, is a very it's a very leftist idea to think that we won't group together and that we won't naturally come together under contract. I don't think that that's the ideal situation for Hoppe, and I don't think that he ever made that argument. If I'm wrong, please feel free to let me know, but I don't think he's ever said that explicitly.
It's people conflating individualism as libertarianism, or just conflating methodological individualism as in like understanding only individuals act and groups don't have rights and like all that. But being like, cool, so I'm a libertarian, so that must mean that I reject collectivism vis-a-vis I don't want to participate in any kind of larger
Right.
group.
And this
And
is
it's like not
you
that.
see this argument very pervasive among agorists, right? There can be no hierarchy and there can be no real grouping, right? Because with if you're grouped together, the natural order is going to form, and then as a result, you're going to get a state. That's the argument, right? But we all know that, or at least here, that just because you're grouped together, you're not going to form a state, right? Those groups are natural and they occur, and they should be allowed to form. And this is the aristocracy, right? So it's it's an interesting thing that libertarians have adopted this, and we could do a whole video about subversion, and I really think we should at some point.
Yeah. My video, my article on individualism actually points this out, that the very atomized individualism is actually a contradiction in terms, because it always leads to great state power. It leads to the Soviet Union. American culture has become more atomized in the last 100 years, and it's only increased state power because without these social institutions to bring people together, people want something else to bring people together, and that's going to be the state if you don't have social institutions like the church.
Right.
That's a great point.
This is the title of Hoppe's book, right? Democracy is the god that failed, right? Because that's what people have done. They've substituted their cultural and ethno-religious beliefs for the state. And that's what's going to happen unless you allow those hierarchical orders to form.
Yep, hierarchy is inevitable. It's just a question of whether it's going to be coercive or voluntary.
Correct.
Anyways, no. Also, since Esso does not like me pointing out what kind of person he is, he has gone on record and said that Konkin is very, very influential to what he believes.
That explains some things.
And I think he's gonna like my video that comes out this weekend. Oh, not my video, my article on the Hoppean.
Oh, that'll be interesting. Yep.
So, yeah, I guess let's continue.
Like being oppressed for people's productivity and tax-paying power. As if they don't like being oppressed in one country, they can just move. This fragmentation also encourages international and interregional trade, as geographically smaller countries have less an ability to be self-sufficient. According to Hoppe, geographically smaller states are always less oppressive than ones in larger governments.
So yeah, hold up there. So that's... I don't believe that he said always. I said that I believe that he said trends in that direction, and in general, that's true, right?
Right.
I mean, yeah, it's not possible to use that in an absolutist fashion. If Hoppe did that, happy to address that, but I don't think that he did.
Right.
I don't think Hoppe speaks in absolutes, but.
Yeah, that would be that's just not something that I don't think he ever said.
Yeah, it would be odd to see that.
Yeah,
And they said that. Okay, I'm sorry, Carlton.
I was about to say, I've already read this, so I'm not going to respond until he puts out an example, because he's about to put out an example of this.
Because in the beginning of the video, he had something else he said where he's like, it was in this one of the earlier things, like in the video, like in the first minute, he said something about they support a secessionist movement no matter what the political ends are, or something like that. And it's like, it's not necessarily true at all. Like,
I would tend to agree with that, just because, let's say, Catalonia basically wants to become a socialist independent state, but the rest of Spain, their democracy would be so much better if Catalonia was a different state, because they would have less socialists voting in their elections.
Yeah, no, I understand all those points. It's just like it's more speaking in the absolute things, as you know, rather than like looking at the example of what's going on
At least
and
temporarily.
having like a nuanced view on it.
Yeah.
There is an argument to be made, and if they would have made this argument, it would have been harder for me to counter that if you allow those groups to separate, the less economically free groups, and the more totalitarian, you've got the communists and the socialists and things like that, they'll naturally collapse, and then as a result want to flood into these other countries. That's a fair counter argument.
Build
It's
the
not
wall.
right. It's not. Yeah, exactly. It's not right, but it is a fair counter argument. Now, when those states do collapse, or those non-states, those people that were flooded in, as Jens just said, you've got to control that flow, right? You can't just let those people in, otherwise they're going to do the same thing. It's like a disease, right? That spreads, especially for the ones that continue to use democratic processes, which most people will. Unfortunately, if this were to happen, where we would see a lot of secession, you would see a lot of people try to still use those democratic processes and not let natural aristocracies form. So I'm reading a book right now called Southern Honor, and it talks about the aristocracy in the South and how that order formed pretty naturally, considering that there was not really any large-scale nobility from previous eras that formed as a result of capitalist competition, and the hierarchical nature of the Old South. And the quote that I put on Twitter recently, let me read that for you real quick, is, one second, is just as German tribesmen expected their leaders to be men of wealth, large kinship networks, and charismatic appeal, so too did Southern whites. And this is a fact, right? That these people that are able to form these aristocracies are the people that are best suited for it. So anyway, that was a rant, but go on.
Yeah, it's I did their example is going to illustrate something very, very telling with these guys, so let's just get to it. Unless someone has something else to say. Oh, and I would like to take credit for saying build the wall. It wasn't Jesus. Anyways.
Towards this end, anarchism is the logical conclusion of a world moving away from globalist alliances and economic hegemonies and into tiny regional governments and free cities.
I don't think Hoppe has ever said that. He's actually said that there's a movement towards globalism and that secessionism needs to be a conscious effort.
Right. Yeah, the world is trending towards centralization, right? That's what's happening right now, and as a result, we need to focus on pushing the counter there. So,
Governments competing for tax money, lowering the direct cost on their citizens until there's nothing left. As such,
that's only true if there's, small states. When you get to big states, it becomes harder and harder to leave.
Well, yeah, if there's actual competition and governance, then yes. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's not this a priori true that governments always tend to tax less over time.
such, the praxis of Hoppe is the support of and creation of secessionist movements in nation-states across the world. So, what's the problem?
So, secessionism is itself a bit of a contentious topic within libertarian circles. Specifically,
there.
how secession
so that's an interesting preface. It is contentious. I've never seen. This is totally my opinion, and I could be easily proven wrong. But the vast majority of Misesians and Hoppians, Rothbardians all support this. The only people that I've seen really counter this are the people that I would consider to be left libertarians. Now, if you guys have a different experience or have different information, please let me know.
No, you're right, and I think it's because in America specifically, the only time that you're ever taught about secession in public education is in regards to the South and more specifically slavery. That's like the only association you have with secession. Like they don't even teach like America leaving like England as like a secessionist movement. They just teach secession is when the South wants slaves. That's what the definition is.
Right, and it's the American Revolution, which is totally not a civil war, which is totally not a secessionist movement, and then the Civil War is just a secessionist movement. It's not a revolution against the North.
Yep, gotta love those narrative building.
Yep. Well, it's just if I was going to be writing an article on the South, it would be the victors write the narrative, and that's basically what we've seen with the South's history.
Yep.
So.
Sorry, I missed that.
So if I was going to be writing an article on the South, it would be that the victors write the narrative, victors write history, and that's what.
Oh, absolutely! It is undeniable, considering that there are examples of Southern writing being literally destroyed, and newspapers being forced out of business.
Well, what is the quote?
Being shut down.
What is the quote? Books aren't burned; they were just removed.
Yes, and that's what happened.
This relates well to physical removal. Communists aren't destroyed; they're just removed.
All right, let him go on.
The contentious topic within libertarian circles, specifically how secession is conceived of and the praxis with which secession is practiced, and whether
the praxis which secession is practiced.
Yeah, oh, God. All right, I'm not. There's no point. Just keep going.
whether or not secession is even compatible with the libertarian set of principles or praxis in the first place. One of the few issues here where
libertarian praxis. That's something important because they are going to talk about their preferred praxis in this video, and that's why I wanted my article to be out by now, but it'll be out this weekend, don't worry. At least I'm hoping it is, because I can't actually do the editing.
I can give you access to my reviewer account. We'll talk about that later.
Okay, yeah, but
set of principles or praxis in the first place. One of the few issues here where the blame for the conceptual disconnect and the problem with defining our terms is not entirely Hoppe's fault. The issue here comes with the concept of secession existing within an inherently pro-political praxis, as in a sovereign, politically recognized entity legally parting from a different political body. The reason why secession by pretty much everyone else, including most of the libertarians who think of themselves as secessionists, conceptualize secession in this way, is because from the secessionist perspective, they're seeking to merely leave the state's jurisdiction and not actually do anything about the state's ability to continue imposing violence upon anyone else, or even them.
Okay, pause it.
Oh.
Pause it. So it's like you're drinking water that's 50% poison, 50% water. Why would you drink something that's 25% water, poison, and 75% water? You're still allowing a system to exist or something. Like, you know what I mean? It's like, why don't you just drink 100% water? And it's like, yeah, but we can't get there. This is a strategy,
right,
to reduce it. And it's like you're not accepting it on the basis that it's like, well, that's still statist because you're not addressing the state. And it's like,
so
these are the same people that say North Korea and America are no different from one another.
Exactly.
And that absolutely, I can't say the word, but effing are.
Yeah, so I'm gonna replay that because I apparently missed what everyone blew up about, so
spoken in this way is because from the secessionist perspective, they're seeking to merely leave the state's jurisdiction and not actually do anything about the state's ability to continue imposing violence upon anyone else, or even them. Nor do they care about or even really take into consideration the state or an entity like the state influencing the rest of society around them through legislative, coercive means.
Pause it. Yeah, okay.
An entity like the state. I like that.
What?
Yeah, that's an interesting one, isn't it?
Also saying that they're not doing anything about this and don't care about this, it's completely... But he's talking about libertarians specifically, like libertarian secessionists. It's like, that's not true at all. What are you talking about?
Yeah, that's an Agora inference. I know it is.
Yeah, that's exactly what he's referring to.
Yeah, yeah.
Exactly. what
Yeah,
he's referring to.
I referred to this earlier, but right around the 15-minute mark, they're going to talk about agorism. So, people. Yep, like I said, Esso was very, very influenced by Konkin, and Filthy is also like that.
There's that whole section right there is absolutely insane. That's an insane. That was an insane thing to say. Is that libertarian secessionists don't care about the state per se.
The whole purpose of secession is opposing the state, right? And we're not even getting to the point where, okay, well, you're not going to do anything about state violence, motherfucker. We're leaving. We're leaving.
If you didn't if you liked the state and if you didn't want to do anything about the state, why would you want to leave?
Right. And they're automatically assuming that there will be no violence or threats or anything like that as a result of leaving. Let's take a look at history for a second. That's definitely what's going to happen, right? Not 100%, but it could, because there are, and I will say that, hundreds of examples.
It's like not accepting a good solution, or because it's not a perfect solution or something. You know, it's like, that's not a perfect utopia. And I know that's not like that's a straw man to use that word in this context, but it's like, well, that's not exactly what the end result we want. That's just kind of like a mediary step. So I would just not take it at all. And it's like, so you'll remain in the union? Like, what are you talking about? Right?
Well,
Here's
what they're really getting at is by not fighting the state, what they mean is we're not dismantling the state we're in. We're just leaving it and creating a new one.
Yeah, and that's well, okay. Let's take that context for a second. Okay, say we are a secessionist movement that wants to establish another state, but say that there are more than just us. Say there are several. If there are more competing states, it is completely arguable that the competition between those states, as Hoppe said, will create a higher level and a higher degree of freedom between those groups competing.
Also, I would like to point out, if you have smaller states, it's easier for a smaller secessionist movement to be able to secede.
Right.
Even if the threat is there, it can influence a smaller state to adjust, like what was said in the argument before. The threat of emigration can absolutely cause a government to adjust their policies to make it more economically liberal or freedom, tendency toward freedom. Not saying that's an absolutist claim, but it's very easily argued for.
Well, look at China. China is a good example. They were going to be destroyed in 1978. I mean, they were on the brink of collapse. I don't think that that's really arguable. But when Deng, and yes, his name is Deng, liberalized part of the economy in order to keep people there and to keep the state alive, right? So China is a good example of what Hoppe is talking about. And the economic independent zones, or whatever they call them, such as Singapore.
Special economic zones. And also Singapore is its own country. It's Shenzhen, I believe, is the special economic zone.
You know, whatever it is. Yeah, I mean that's a great example, right? And people love to live there, right?
Also Yugoslavia, they couldn't have a constitution for more than 5 years because of all of the different ethnic groups and religious groups that were there. So they
And
kept
then,
on having
that's so
to.
interesting. And that is a great example. Sorry, I'm over talking you a little bit, but that's a great example. Slavic cultures hate each other, and it is a great example of what we were talking about earlier. That even though that both Slavs, if you consider Slavs white, um, shout out to 4chan there. If you consider Slavs white, then why are they in such constant conflict, right? Because there are groups within groups, and this is a natural growth of that.
Yeah.
I'm just typing
mean-
something in chat.
You could even say like North Korea and South Korea, which both groups are, I think, like genetically exactly the same. I mean, it's the same nation of people, but they have two entirely different state models, and you only see people fleeing in one direction, and it demonstrates the same way that, like, if you had a larger body that had of let's say a homogeneous ethnicity or cultural group, and they had one area of the state that's seceded or liberalized economically, like why you would see people, why that would be attractive, instead of just being like, well, that's just forming a second state. I'd rather just keep it as one state because now there's just less governments or something. Like, it's just so dumb.
Yeah, I think Ryan McMakin actually has a great article on Mises. I can't remember what the title of it is, but it's basically we need more states, not less, because of these reasons that we're talking about.
Yeah, it's what is
Political
it?
decentralization as
Yeah.
a road to anarcho-capitalism, I think,
Yeah.
or something like that.
That was a speech at Mises U this year.
Well, the article I'm talking about is much older. It's probably a few years old at this point.
Yeah. Let's see.
I'm trying to find it.
And,
Oh, no,
it still-
political
it still just
anarchy.
holds that.
Political anarchy was the title of it. Political anarchy is how the West got rich. It's from March of this year.
And
Yeah, that's not it either. That's
still-
not the one I'm talking about anyway.
it still holds that, like, even with, like, yeah, well, you're still living under a state, like, so if in the secession you're not achieving libertarianism per se, you're just living under a smaller state. It's like, yeah, but you could, like, your state representatives live a lot closer to you. They're a lot less shielded than in DC or something, and they have it's like more of like the monarchy argument, of sense of like you could really be chased out of there. You don't have this insanely large wing, or as large of a wing, protecting you. You kind of like your neighbors, like like a local town. If it's seceded or something, it's like you could live on the same street as your mayor or whatever.
Oh man, Mises has so many good decentralization and secession articles. Like one from Dave Benner from April of last year. Political centralization ended the Roman Republic. Anyways.
I mean, he's literally counter-signaling decentralization. It's so crazy.
Right.
I
and-
can say I've never heard someone who claims to be a libertarian argue against decentralization as an idea or as a strategy. Like, I don't even think the Cato types would do that. You know what I mean? Like, I haven't heard any of the Cato types do that. I guess I don't pay attention as much to that side of libertarianism, but it's just like so far beyond me as to why they would attack it as a strategy. You know what I mean?
And this goes back to what Bert was
Tells
talking
us
about
that
earlier about
all
Yeah, so I think this really goes to show the difference between the left libertarians and the original libertarians, because Rothbard back in the 50s was saying that we shouldn't necessarily call ourselves libertarians. We should maybe call ourselves hard rightists.
right, because that's what libertarian quote unquote libertarians are, and that's why I stopped calling myself one, because that term has become so utterly conflated. And shout out to my article here about Hoppeanism as a right-wing ideology. But this is what happened. Rothbard saw it happen, and you get an increase of egalitarians, and this is the result, right? Is that you're seeing a lot more egalitarian and maybe unintentionally pro-centralization arguments.
Yep. I'm looking to.
God, it really bothers me I can't find that article by Ryan McMahon.
I'm literally flying through Mises.org right now trying to find
Yeah,
that article.
I don't know why. It's such a brilliant article. It's one of my favorite articles he's ever written. I really hope that it didn't get taken down somehow. But anyway.
Well,
No, it
I mean, you can make the analogy. I mean, it's not 100% analogous, but it is the same concept of just an entirely private property society in the sense that some people who have control over resources may choose to use them poorly, but the fact that there's so many people competing, you can always go somewhere else, or you know, and them not using them wisely is going to hurt them, because it's like if they had a well or something and they didn't want to share it, or you know, they couldn't profit from it, they would just squander it basically. So like, it's not a perfect analogy, but it is like a similar concept is like a bunch of tiny governments or breaking up to decentralized states, and having more of them would kind of be better, because you'd be incentivized to have to be more wise with your policies if you wanted to, you know, thrive. Like you'd want to attract people, and you wouldn't want people emigrating away.
Right, and the more natural aristocracy will see that, the more they'll want to compete, and this is true in history, right? They're wanting to compete, and usually that competition was through the form of exploration. That's why there were so many state programs in the form of exploration, because they wanted to increase their ability to increase their own wealth, right? And this is true, and this is what would happen, is that these states are going to do what's best suited, and not necessarily absolutist, right? Because there are stupid ideologies like communism that won't focus on things like that, but capitalist countries will do that, and the communist countries will obviously fail, right? We've seen that throughout history. I don't think anybody would deny that. So in that situation, you've got states that are competing against one another. One state is a communist country that will eventually fail. The other states are capitalist countries. The capitalist countries will compete against one another and tangentially against the communist country, and do their best to keep people coming in that will help grow the aristocracy for them.
Right. I want to circle back to something because I just realized an argument. So Hoppe's argument that decentralization in more states creates more competition, and that's better for a person's liberty and just general economic growth, is almost the same argument that having more businesses and a freer market will create more competition, and therefore will be better for the consumer. It's almost the exact same analysis being done.
Yeah, so here I'm going to read a quick quote from this Ryan McMahon article, which is it's a really brilliant article. The article.
Send that on Discord. Oh, you already did.
It's in the
He
chat.
already did.
The article's entitled "We Need More Borders and More States." It's from 2016.
I remember that.
Yeah, it's a brilliant article, and let me just read this section of it real quick. And it's under the benefits of decentralization and secession. Imagine, for example, the state of Zulia, in western Venezuela, where were to expel Venezuelan military and fully open the border with Colombia. Goods and services would immediately begin to flow into the newly liberated Zulia territory, and goods would become far more plentiful. But this wouldn't just benefit the people of Zulia. The new reality would also mean that the Venezuelan border would stop at Zulia's eastern border, making the freedom of the border areas now more accessible to the neighboring states of Trujillo and Merida as well. Sorry, I don't know how to pronounce those well. Residents of Trujillo State, who might have been many hours from an external border before, may now be a mere hour from the border, thus allowing more people the ability to travel to the border and make more extensive use of black markets or even legal markets outside the reach of the Venezuelan regime. And this is this is what we talk about in regards to the idea that political decentralization and state decentralization, the state of Zulia in this example is not a state, right? But it is creating conditions which are less state-like and giving more people access to those markets that would allow more states within Venezuela to do the same thing, right? So,
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. It's just it's going to be hard for them to argue against this, just because, as I said, right before you started that, it's almost the very same economic theory that would derive a free market would be the one that would derive more states, more economic freedom. At least ceteris paribus, which is going to be something that they are going to fail at, because of course they're going to fail at ceteris paribus. Do I need to explain what ceteris paribus is, or does everyone understand?
I know what it means, but you should explain it for everyone else.
yeah, do it for the video. It'll be good for the video.
Ceteris paribus essentially means is Latin for all of the things being equal. So one of the things that they're going to do, I thought they were going to do it right after I delayed talking about this, but Filthy's going to come on and say that, if political centralization doesn't necessarily lead to more freedom or less freedom, and he's going to use the USA versus the USSR back in the 50s and 60s as an example.
I've got that one.
And he's just being like, yeah, just the size of the state doesn't have much to do with how economically free it is. And I'm just like, but you're not. That's not how economic analysis works. You can't just point at a situation. Let's say a situation that appears to contradict the economic theory and not look at the other circumstances. For instance, let's say demand for a product went up by 10%. You would expect the price to also go up, or at least stay the same. But let's say it goes down. Well, that would seem to contradict the law of demand. However, if you also realize that supply went up by 100%, then you'd be like, oh, the supply is actually what's driving this, the increase in supply, not necessarily just demand. You can't. Ceteris paribus is trying to look at each factor in a vacuum, and
right.
And it
ignores the Bastiat principle of what is seen and what is unseen, right? It attempts to ignore that.
Right. And that's never what's going to happen in real life. And this is why Mises actually criticizes the empiricists in economics so vigorously, because you're never going to be able to just find a single factor working in isolation in society. That's one of the arguments. And so you're going to have these very, very complex models for things that no one really abides by. I mean, if you listen to Austrian alternatives to mainstream economics, they're showing you all these neoclassical Chicagoan mathematical theories, and they show a couple, and they're doing the utility function for children, and then once they solve the utility function, out pops out of thin air 2 children, because that's what they decided they wanted. That's not really how life works.
Yeah, I think you pretty well got it there.
So, it's just a they're going to fail ceteris paribus a couple times in this video. They're just not going to understand why you would look at something in a vacuum, essentially. And they're going to use examples that are not, obviously not in a vacuum, and they're just going to know all circumstances around that. So,
all right, let's hit it.
To where even if they were to somehow get the state to go along with the secessionist libertarians, setting up a smaller government, quote-unquote, or some sort of private society where the state had no jurisdiction, the state would still be able to force them to operate in its interests by manipulating the market signals of firms which exist within the new libertarian territory's legal economy.
So this is interesting because this is essentially the same argument as wouldn't warlords take over, except it's wouldn't states do things to try and cripple the other smaller states. Well, of course they would. And as a result, they would lose because the smaller, freer states would be able to better compete with the larger, more imposing states.
Yeah, I don't understand how you're going to be an ANCAP and think that this is going to happen.
Yeah. I mean, if people haven't watched it, watch Bob Murphy's video, Wouldn't Warlords Take Over? He talks about, and there's other supplementary videos there. Can you tell me the minute mark in the video?
It's 6:58.
Okay. 6 minutes, 58 seconds?
Yep.
All right. I took some notes at about the 10-minute mark, but they're not very good notes. So, but anyway, check out Bob Murphy's video on that. There is another supplementary video to that about competition and how states would try and force this on other smaller states or other decentralized units, even anarchist societies, and he handles that extremely well.
Yeah, so just so everyone knows, I am putting links to everything in the description as we talk about them. So I just updated with the latest one. It's an article, the one I found. So I'm just putting resources in as we talk about them.
Cool.
I can't believe we've only watched 6 minutes of this video.
I know, it's just, yeah.
I need a beer.
I mean, go ahead. I mean, we're gonna be here a while.
It's just like book club.
It's worse than book club because at least book club we're talking about something we at least agree on 95% of it.
Oh, it is past noon. It's about that time, boys.
Yep. Oh man. Oh, and I forgot to start this video with wishing everyone is having a good Domitian fast. So I guess I can do that now.
Colton is telling you to become Orthodox.
Yeah, I think Jared, you're Catholic, correct?
I was born Catholic, but I haven't been to Catholic Mass in a very long time.
Okay.
Same.
Okay. Because I was about to say, I think the Domitian fast for you actually begins after the Domitian of Mary, because they
Yeah,
did it.
well, I would probably celebrate with my wife, who's Orthodox. So that is that's something that I probably need to pursue more. I need to do some more of that. So maybe you can give me some links on that.
Yeah, actually, if you want to, so we're doing a private book club on catechism with a couple catechumens and I. So if you wanted to get in on that I can give you the book after this.
Cool.
Yep. So
Good play.
let's just play. I think Taylor's still out, so.
Play it on double speed.
I'm here. No, I'm here. I'm ready to go.
Okay.
Secessionist libertarians see becoming politically independent from the state, that is, the state recognizing that they or their organization of secessionist libertarians, through legislative means, is not subject to the state's dominion as a means of achieving libertarian ends. And there are quite a few libertarians who would probably try and argue that secessionism doesn't inherently exist within a political praxis.
I hope someone understood the beginning of that because it just flew over my head.
Just keep playing it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's... anyways.
However, just like secessionism broadly as a means of abolishing the state, I've never heard a good explanation for why this is, and it doesn't appear to be possible to provide one since the entire concept seems to rely inescapably upon the assumption that their secession would be recognized through legislative fiat, and therefore is dependent upon the assumption that the state will just leave them alone and let them have property.
Okay, okay.
But selling beats will definitely end the state.
Why would states just let you leave? They wouldn't. This is a strategy, not a philosophy. It is the ought side of the is ought gap, right? This is what we ought to do this. The connection there, I don't know if it's been made. If it has, I'm not immediately aware of it. But that's, I think it's a bit absurd to say that, we're looking for an is connection here, and we've already dealt with that.
Well, so there's two theories that Hoppe puts out. One he put out in the 90s and one that he put out more recently. The video where he puts out the more recent one is something called Anti-State Guerrilla Warfare. It's kind of difficult to understand what he's talking about there. It took me like 5 watches to figure it out. But, so, in that one, he is talking about delegitimizing the state by having smaller political bodies that are within the state, let's say states or counties or something like that, not enforce federal laws or contradict federal laws, and just ignore federal courts as well. This delegitimizes the state because, for instance, on the state level, states have been legalizing marijuana, and meanwhile, the federal government and federal courts have ruled that marijuana is illegal. This delegitimizes the state because the federal government can't actually do anything here. And if you were to continue to do this, the state would become more and more delegitimized until it collapses.
Yeah, like nullification.
Yeah.
Basically what you're talking about, right?
Yep.
Yeah, this is evidenced in a few cases, not just marijuana, but gun rights as well. The enforcement of federal gun control has, as a result, caused an enormous growth in the pro-gun movement, right? And as a result, you've seen a lot of states move in that direction, independent. And when I say states, I'm talking about United States, one of the states of the United States. You've seen gun rights grow exponentially in those states.
Right.
Missouri is a prime example.
Right. The concealed carry movement basically started in the 90s, and almost every state now has shall license.
Every single state has shall issue, and then several states, I think,
May issue.
20 to 25 are constitutional carry. So you see that decentralization of that is happening because of the benefit that we have of those independent states. Now, if the United States was a total federal zone, it didn't have that. Yeah, it would. You would not see that as much.
And where I live right now, the county I live in recently voted just within the county to become a Second Amendment sanctuary county, where any further gun legislation is apparently, but I mean, this is still, so my point still holds that apparently any further federal gun legislation that's passed will not be enforced or not recognized by my county.
Right, and this is the same. Sorry, go ahead. I don't mean to overtalk you. I do that.
No, you're good. I mean, I'm basically done. My point is just to say that you can say that was a state vote that was done by fiat and decree by them putting it on paper that they're not going to enforce these federal laws, and you could say that that's very statist, and maybe an agorist would just carry or disregard the gun laws anyway. But I don't view it as being the worst thing ever that the state that has a large gun culture refuses to view the federal government as having legitimate laws. Like,
right,
that's a good thing.
And you're not going to be able. You're not going to be able to really speak against that, in my opinion. It happened, right? It is a fact. It has happened, and it is only as a result of having those distinctions between states. because the political power that states have enabled them to do that, right? And then you can also use another example that that the agrists hate, which is the case of Brexit, right? They said it would never happen. It's never going to happen. It'll never pass. They'll never separate. And then it did. It did pass. It is happening. And now they're saying that, well, you're just going to get a more statist Britain as a result, because the EU is going to impose the fact that they can't be in the open market. Well, guess what? I guarantee, and if I'm wrong, I'll eat my own hat, that the UK will end up making better trade agreements than the open market for their independent state than the EU's giving them, with all the taxes and burdens and regulations that the EU imposes as a result of that open market. Not as a result, but as as an adder.
Well, even if Britain were to create more trade agreements and would to be more statist within their smaller unit, that would actually be better for the EU, because it would be a more statist region of the EU leaving.
Right.
So, I mean, either way, like, if the 20...
Either way, someone benefits, right? Yeah.
Right. It's like if California seceded, but they became way more leftist and had way worse from our perspective,
Right.
Policies. It would be better for the rest of the U.S. as a sovereign 49 states together, because then they wouldn't be influencing our policies if they could do that on their own.
And it's not just California, but let's look at California politics. What if the 20 counties surrounding LA left the rest of California?
Right.
It's just like
California would change almost immediately.
Yeah,
Oh
and
my God, that would
the
rule.
more you break it down, the better it would get, which is why Rothbard was pro-secession, but he also said more down to the individual, like you're just driving towards...
Well, not necessarily down to the individual. It's down to basically property.
No, but I'm quoting him directly.
Okay. But yeah, no, it's anyways,
But yeah, as things trend in that direction toward the individual, the more free that you get, obviously, right? The more free everyone is, because no one is imposing things on you, and you're not imposing things on others, right? I mean, that's just a basic truth.
And that's what he was getting towards in Nations by Consent too.
Yeah,
I just read that again yesterday because I was on a big reading kick apparently when I was bored. But yeah, I mean, like he was becoming more, pro decentralization by advocating for nationalism over the USSR, pretty much. Like that's what he was alluding to.
I mean, the way things go here, is that you go from you can start at the United Federation of Planets, and then you go down to independent Earth and the globalist world order, and then you go down to nationalism and nationalist states, and then you go down to smaller separatist states, and smaller and smaller and smaller. This is the way things need to trend, right? In order to create more conditions of freedom, and that's just a fact.
Like, nationalism per se isn't inherently like a libertarian goal, but if it's compared to globalism, then it absolutely is a strategy and something that should be embraced as a path towards liberty. If you're choosing nationalism over globalism, what I mean?
Yeah, and I don't disagree with you at all, but as a result of that trend, I would say it is a libertarian goal to fight towards nationalism and away from globalism in order to create these conditions for us to become more separatist, right?
Yeah. In that context, I just meant removed, like in the context of someone like a Lincolnite who wanted to keep the Union together versus like a separatist movement,
right? And this, right, and this is why Rothbard said that the only two just wars that America ever fought were the American Revolution and the war against Northern aggression, right? So, or the War of Southern Independence, I think is how he put it.
That's how he phrased it. Yeah.
Yeah, I believe that's his quote.
And it's just yes, technically, the state I live in, and I mean, I'm technically, clearly, the state I live in as a state doesn't have more of a claim over my property than I do, but I would yield them that over the federal government, over Washington D.C. having like jurisdiction over my property.
Right, but I would say that the people within your state have a much better claim to the public property in your state
Right,
than
of
the federal
course.
government ever does, right?
Right, exactly. Like, yeah. Like, that's 100% what it's about. It's all about who has a more just claim.
Right. All right, so let's continue.
In other words, it's literally the state-enforced anarchy meme, except these people are being dead serious. Now,
What?
So I think I know what he's referencing here is that there is there are a few memes about, we're just going to take over and then enforce freedom on everyone. I don't think that would be a bad thing. That would be awesome.
Right.
And then as a result of your forcing freedom on people, as a result, that freedom that power will dissolve.
Yeah,
right?
can you imagine if Pinochet, instead of inviting Friedman over, he invited Rothbard over,
Yeah.
and just like was like, okay, I'm just going to create a Rothbardian state, and then once I'm done like freeing the market, I'm just going to dissolve it. Like, wouldn't that just be a much better thing to have happen than what actually did?
Right. So, like, reverse Nobunaga, basically, if you guys get that reference.
No. So
I don't, but the way people, to play on that, what you were talking about with Pinochet, just in America, the way people view the legitimacy of the state and the functions it has, and the way they attack people like libertarians in general, you would see, like, in a hypothetical example, like if Ron Paul became president or had some sort of...
He didn't become president. He became emperor.
Sure.
God
even
Emperor
better. So
Ron Paul.
if he became God Emperor Paul, and he started repealing like agencies and closing stuff down, I mean, they would view that as totalitarian, even though what he's doing is literally just giving people their freedom back. Like, he would be smeared. Like, if he started abolishing this department, closing this public thing, like abolishing the post office, abolishing public schools, like going through and just doing all this stuff, people would look at this like, they would be viewed and written about like a tyrant, like a dictator coming in, smashing up all these things. But if you just look at it from like our perspective, it's like that, like, you're using the state to achieve like a more libertarian future. But it's like, is that like that? I just don't understand why you would be opposed to that.
Well, and it's like it's because, and this is my opinion, I don't mean to impose this opinion on them or anyone else, but from my perspective, it is a natural tendency of libertarians to oppose any form of force, right? And they're going to reference the non-aggression principle, which is great. I agree with the non-aggression principle. The thing is that the state is force. It is literally force itself, right? So to use that force against force is called, do you guys know? Self-defense, right? So if we're destroying the state, using the state, I don't disagree with that. And I don't disagree, and I fully disagree with the fact that people say that, well, voting is violence and therefore you can't vote and you shouldn't vote. Bullshit. Read No Treason, page 7. I even have that. I have that page memorized. No Treason. Spooner specifically says that using violence against others is justified in self-defense, and voting is self-defense. It is conscription to the state. Therefore, you are allowed reasonably to use that force against others to protect yourself.
Right. And I don't care. I mean, this isn't their argument, so I'm not strawmanning what they're saying here. This is almost a little off topic from their point, but it is to say, I don't care about the democratic process. I'm totally a Machiavellian. I just care about having the results that I want. So I don't care how it's achieved. This is to say, like, via secession or other things, like if everyone voted, or enough people, like over 51% of people voted to repeal the Second Amendment or abolish guns or something. I don't care if we hacked into the system of the voting system and changed all the ballots and completely rigged the election to not have that be the outcome. I don't care. I don't have any weird thing about using the state to prevent stuff or what. It's like like I'm trying to aim towards this like end goal. Like I don't care about engaging in these activities to try to force the outcomes I want. I don't like care how it comes about.
Yeah, and that's not to say you're philosophically a consequentialist, right? You are.
Right, of course not. No.
Yeah, no, we're not making that, because I know that somebody's going to try and straw man that argument. We're not saying that. We're saying that as a matter of strategy, that these things can be achieved using those goals, and inherently we don't oppose the end results.
Right. So
that's why I don't care about limiting the voting pool. And you could say that that's statist by the state determining who's able to have a say in the democracy or something. But like I think Dave Smith said this, but I don't care if they passed a law that's saying only people in the Mises Institute could vote or something like that.
That would be amazing.
Right, and it's just like, well, that's not fair because you're having this maybe 20 individuals say for the. It's like I don't care. Like that's because they would just vote the state away. But
right,
like so I don't care about like some weird, super autistic ANCAP principle of like participating in state action.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like,
well, this is why Rothbard was involved with the Libertarian Party in the beginning, right? Is because he agreed with that. He wanted that to happen. He wanted to destroy the state using political means. And there's a good quote, I can't remember it off the top of my head, but that this is basically a viable option, and it may be our only viable option. To use the state in that reference, and especially as it comes to secession, to achieve those goals. Not saying that the state won't, and this is what they're getting at again, that the state won't oppose us. The state will absolutely oppose us. I mean, it's obvious.
Right.
But the fact that we're doing that is the goal, and that's the way we should be moving.
Right.
And
if someone just walked up to my door right now and said, "Oh, you're going to be the czar of the Fed," and I used, my unlimited power over the Fed to stop all money printing and then go on Fox News, CNN, and all of that to talk about the Austrian business cycle and how all of this printing of fiduciary media is going to create a business cycle that is a recession or depression, would that necessarily be unlibertarian?
Right.
Right.
And another thing that we haven't brought up is how they keep saying this is like the strategy is like using secession as the strategy. It's like, well, sure, but we also don't just have one strategy. Decentralization, nullification, like we mentioned earlier, secession, and even stuff like the parts of agorism, which just specifically mean counter economics, of like, yeah, you could just go fishing, like you don't have to get, who gives a shit. Like all this, I'm for all of it. It's not just to say we only support secession, and this is like the Hoppean strategy is like only supporting secessionist movements or something. It's just you can participate in whatever way you feel like will achieve, like a private property society.
Can I just make a quick point about so-called quote unquote counter economics? Counter economics is just free market economics. Like you're participating in the free market. That's why the term is a meme. It's literally just a freaking meme, because at the end of the day, if you're just participating in a market, then that's what it is. It's the free market. It's not counter to anything. And I don't think like Bert said earlier that, if you're selling, fruit or whatever, that's going to end the state. But it is that's an important distinction to me, that it is not counter economics. It is free market economics.
Yeah, I was just using the term in a way that like they would understand.
Right, but my articles go into this more, but the counter economics and the agora isn't just free market economics, because it's implying there will be no employer-employee relationships, that businesses are like states.
And I'm not saying that. I'm saying that the meme of counter economics, the thing that they're putting forward, is basically just describing free market economics. Now, the actual literature behind that does not agree with that. It is not. It's an anti-wage labor, it's anti-hierarchy, it's all of that. But the meme and how they're marketing it is free market economics, and that's disingenuous.
My article at the end, I actually go into this, but they market agorism like the feminists market feminism.
It's just freedom, right?
Yeah. Well, the feminists say it's just about having equal rights for women, which almost everyone in society agrees with, and yet almost no one is a feminist.
Not me.
Yeah, not me, but it's but you have to recognize that almost everyone in our society agrees with equal rights for women, and so
Yeah, these are all loaded terms that have backdoor philosophies, like Trojan
Right.
horsing them in. Like that's the
Yeah.
whole thing of like civil rights or equal rights or any
Well,
stuff. It's like
it
And to circle
it
around
sounds
again-
nice. Like if
it's
Congress
mom politics.
if
Politics.
if Congress tomorrow proposed the Saving Children Act, you'd almost invariably have in that legislation that we're going to be bombing children in the Middle East or something like that. And it's kind of like the same propaganda type thing.
Yeah, it's subversive marketing, and I don't appreciate it. So that's why I wanted to bring it up. But anyway, I like we're only like a quarter of the way through the video, so let's.
Yeah, we just got to keep going.
If I were to go over all of my criticisms of libertarian secession specifically, this section would probably be longer than all of the others combined. Plus, I've
awesome.
already gone over the main issues with libertarianism being argued within a political praxis in my video
Pause.
criticizing.
Super quick, and then we can move on. Minarchism is not libertarian. It is not inherently libertarian, but it's more libertarian than maximalism or hyperstatism or something like that. And we're talking about graduation here. And this is what I get to. Like, okay, you've got Kim Jong Un there. Like, they think that the United States is equivalent to
The
North Korea.
DPRK. Yeah. The funny thing with this is that I would say that Austrian minarchists are more libertarian than Konkin or what's that other guy's name?
Wally Porter or something.
No, the Bleeding Heart libertarian guy.
Oh,
Roderick Long.
Steve
Robert
Horowitz.
Long, yeah.
Roderick Long, yeah. Steve Horowitz, all those guys. I would say Gary North is more libertarian than those guys.
I agree with Gary North. There are some minarchists that I don't know if I would necessarily agree with that on, but they get the ideas more right. Mostly from the perspective of, if you're dealing with someone that's hard right or a paleocon or someone like that in that realm of thought, someone like even Gottfried or someone like that, you're talking about someone that inherently gets the other side of the argument, not necessarily the anarchist argument, but you get someone who understands the right-wing anti-egalitarian idea, right? And understands the graduated scale of freedom. But anyway, sorry.
Yeah, and it's also like the Rothbard, do you hate the state mentality.
Right.
Of like you could have a minarchist like Ron Paul or something who like hates the state, but like an anarchist like David Friedman who doesn't hate the state, but he is an anarchist. The reason he opposes the state is it's like less efficient and has like different outcomes than like a truly free market or something. But Ron Paul really just being like an Austrian understands
Right.
from a completely deontological thing of why the state is bad.
Right. Ron Paul, Gary North, these are Austrian minarchists. They're much better than almost any anarchist that's not Austrian. And I'm not going to count left Austrians as Austrian because
I don't like them.
it's just because there's nothing in Austrian
Just be
economics
honest.
there's nothing in Austrian economics that supports their anti-hierarchy thing. Like
Right. The egalitarian mindset is itself anti-libertarian.
Dude,
Right.
the egalitarian mindset is a fire name for a book that we should write.
All right.
Down.
yeah, actually,
I need to
you know
I
what
need to make an.
we can just do what Hoppe and Rothbard has done with so many of their books and just take articles from their website and just make it into a book.
Oh god, that's such a good idea.
I need to make a fucking in defense of Gary North video.
Hell yeah. That'd be
I
awesome.
really do.
Or just an
Or just an
article.
article.
Yeah, I could do that
That'd
too.
be perfect. All right, let's go on.
Yes.
Minarchism, and since it's not really integral to the subject of this essay, just know that ends are a reflection of the means used to achieve them. Since
Pause.
this is the case,
The ends are, in essence, a reflection of the means used to achieve them. Okay. We've gone over this. That's not necessarily the case.
Right. But this is also kind of interesting because this is a critique of Hans Hermann Hoppe, not libertarian secessionists generally. Hoppe actually wants to have a peaceful secession. He actually talks about how to have that happen. He's not talking
much.
He's not talking about a violent revolution, because he doesn't want that. He actually wants a peaceful separation of peoples that want to separate. So
right, and it is only defensive, right? Because if you say, okay, we're going to leave, and you leave, and then the state aggresses against you, and a civil war kicks off, who's the frickin' aggressor, right?
yeah,
It is the person that is trying to prevent you from leaving. That is the aggressor. Period.
yep.
All right, let's do it.
You can't really argue for libertarian conclusions around the assumption that you'll reach those conclusions with means that rely on state coercion or legislation. So, as a
That's not
disclaimer,
true at all.
Say that again.
That's so not true at all.
I didn't catch what he said. Sorry.
Rewind that.
Assumption that you'll reach those conclusions
Back
with
one
means
more
that
level.
this is the case. You can't really argue for libertarian conclusions around the assumption that you'll reach those conclusions with means that rely on state coercion or legislation.
Yeah, that's absolutely BS, and that's provable with historical examples, namely the one we already used, which is the recent gun rights movement, right?
Yeah, that's what I was gonna bring up.
It is inarguable that the freedom to own and carry firearms is more libertarian than the federal control thereof.
Right. So the concealed carry movement is way more libertarian than what we had before, where you couldn't conceal carry at all.
Right. Yeah. Maybe he's talking from a moralist perspective here, but from a realistic, or not realistic, but
From praxis. From praxis.
Yeah. I mean, it's just not true. So.
And maybe like even like the gay marriage argument in the sense that like in a totally private property society you can make a contract with anyone. We don't have that. We have a state society, a state recognized marriage thing. So when two gay people can't get a contract from the state, it's like technically a piece of legislation that says that they're able to do that. So it's kind of like the state sanctioning it. And the best solution is just not have the state be involved. But as an alternative, it's like, so you're saying it's less libertarian to let two people engage in a contract that they want because you're having to take a positive state action? I don't know. It just doesn't seem...
It's not consistent. Yeah.
It's not, yeah.
All right, let's do it.
So, as a disclaimer, in general, I find myself at odds with the notion that secession can be a libertarian strategy. This being said, Hoppe's perspective, even as far as libertarian secessionism goes, is complete incomprehensible nonsense, and frankly, I'm shocked more people haven't criticized him here.
I'm not going to address the ad hominem. It's just dumb.
Yeah, that's just ridiculous.
Okay.
Let him read it.
Integration, centralization, and economic market integration are two completely different phenomena. Political integration involves the territorial expansion of a state's power of taxation and property regulation, expropriation. Economic integration is the extension of the interpersonal and interregional division of labor and market participation. In principle, taxing and regulating private economy owners and market income earners, all governments are counterproductive. They reduce market participation in the formation of economic wealth. Once the existence of a government has been assumed, however, no direct relationship between territorial size and economic integration exists. Switzerland and Albania are both small countries, but Switzerland exhibits a high degree of economic integration, whereas Albania does not. Both the U.S. and the former...
So this is what we just talked about a minute ago, right? Just because, Hoppe is making the argument here that is not necessarily directly linked, it does move in that direction for states that want to be freer, right, and be more competitive. It's not saying that this is an absolutist idea, that that's what will happen. That we're not saying that. There is multitude, a plethora of
with Hoppa, especially when he talks about.
All right, guys, I'm back.
Oh, okay. Are we
Yeah.
still streaming?
You stop streaming.
I stopped streaming on Discord. I did not stop streaming, to YouTube.
But
Yeah, I just pulled out my phone and was using that to listen to you guys. So.
Okay. But yeah, so I mean, ultimately, at the end of the day, Hoppe is not talking about this is an absolutist statement. It is absolutely not directly linked. You can't make that statement because states will still act however they want to act. Hoppe is just saying, ultimately, that the state will trend in that direction if they want to compete and be able to survive. And this goes back to, again, what I was talking about with China, right? China recognized the fact that the USSR had collapsed. They've got buildings of people observing that, and that's why they liberalized part of the market, right? Because they wanted to survive.
yeah, and it seems like they're unable to pick between two bad choices. And let's just say they're both bad choices. They're still unable to pick. They still want the third choice. So it's like, would you rather live in would you rather live in a bigger state or a smaller state? And it's like, no, I want to live under anarcho-capitalism or whatever they would say.
Yeah,
and it's okay, but you can't say, you have to pick. Would you rather live in a state that's seceding from the federal government or in the entire the situation we have now? It's you pick if you had to, gun to your head, you have to pick one. You tell me you wouldn't go with this seceding state, or you wouldn't?
Depends.
You know what I mean?
It depends on who is seceding. If it was the 20 counties surrounding LA that was seceding, I'd stay in the United States.
Right. Okay, fair enough. But they're just talking about being opposed to secession in general, and it's just I just don't see how you're when it's just two choices of no one seceding or favoring secession.
Right. And Bert, if you were in the larger section there where the LA County seceded, you would still be in favor of secession.
I would still be in favor of it for sure. Right. Yeah. I wouldn't want to live in there, but I'm saying I'd still be in favor of it. That's what I meant with my question. That's what I meant with my question. Or maybe it's just like, would you rather live in like a globalist government where there's one world government for everyone, but it's maybe like a more monarchist government, or would you rather live in a situation where there's 400 competing governments that are all broken up?
The thing is that monarchy can only really exist in political anarchy. That's one of the articles in the video description is when there is those 400 different states, there's going to be competition, and that you're actually going to see monarchy. Meanwhile, in one world government, even if for some reason it was set up like the United States was set up to be a monarchist government, it's going to quickly, almost immediately, start just abusing whatever constitution you try to put in place to limit it. I mean, that's what happened in America. Madison was a very, very good federalist. Then when he saw federalism in practice, he almost became an anti-federalist. I mean, that's how big the shift was. And he was so mad at so many of his compatriots disobeying their oaths of office just to get more political power and get more favors and all the things that Hoppe says in his theory would happen in a democracy. That's actually what happened in the early days of the federal government. So, I mean, yeah. Yep.
So, all right, let's proceed.
The Soviet Union are large. Yet while there is much division of labor and market participation in the US, there was almost no economic integration in the Soviet Union, where virtually no private capital ownership existed. Centralization, then, can go...
So, quick point, and then you just hit play again after I'm done talking. This is what we were just saying. That, yes, while Hoppe is saying that there is no correlation, but look at what happened to the Soviet Union. It collapsed. It got destroyed. End of story.
Yep, it even goes in, centralization implies economic disintegration and retrogression.
Yep.
Hand in hand with either economic progress or retrogression. Progress results whenever a less taxing and regulating government expands its territory at the expense of a more exploitative one. If the reverse occurs, centralization implies economic disintegration and retrogression. Political competition, then, is far more effective device for limiting a government's natural desire to expand its exploitative powers than are internal constitutional limitations.
Hoppe goes on to explain his position in greater detail in the fifth essay of Democracy, the God That Failed, entitled On Centralization and Secession. Basically, his characterization of a libertarian secession is that a superstate which privatizes everything, whatever that means, will take over other states. And
what do you mean, whatever that means?
So I have a quick point before we get to that. So those two quotes there in the previous scene, those were taken. One of them was right, and then he jumped a bunch of text and jumped right to where he said the last part of that. So right. Extremely suspect doing that because he skips over the forced integration argument. He skips over the Slovenian and Yugoslavian examples in the Baltics. And the Soviet Union, and then Hoppe says by virtue of secession, hegemonic domestic relations are replaced by contractual, mutually beneficial foreign relations. Instead of forced integration, there is voluntary separation. So it's very important. Please go read that article. It's very important that you read that in context because he's skipping over that intentionally.
Yep.
All right, so this last piece, can you rewind that a little bit so we can talk specifically about that?
A libertarian secession is that a superstate which privatizes everything, whatever that means.
What do you mean, whatever that means?
Yeah, literally, what do you mean?
And he doesn't even say that privatizes everything. He is saying that is more free market, that is less exploitative, and so on and so forth. Because if a state privatized everything, there would be no state.
Yeah, that's like axiomatically true. Like,
Right.
Well, it's not even just axiomatically true. It's definitionally true.
well,
Like,
sure, yeah.
So
But even like what he's referring to, saying that like a super state couldn't have mass privatization. I mean, yes, it could. It
Yeah, we
very
could have
well.
the same.
it very-
We could have the same government we have now that privatized all the public schools. So there's no more public schools. Privatized the post office. Privatized maybe the DMV, for example. Just like they could privatize police. We could have private police with the state right now. They could.
You
start
can
privatizing these
maintain
things.
a giant monopoly on violence vis-a-vis like military presence, but still have everything else be privatized. Like, what do you mean? Whatever that means.
yeah,
like-
yeah.
And for that would be better. Yes. Sorry, autistic, not perfect, and Sam, but it would still be preferable to not having it private. That's not a hard thing to accept.
Anyway, yeah. Let's.
Yeah. Apparently, these guys hate Spooner's post office.
Will take over other states and force them to privatize their state property because it's
Force
in
them
the
to
nature of
privatize?
government.
All right. Let's come on.
Yeah. I was about to say, back when Hoi 4 was way more based, I played as voluntary Japan and caused communist China to become voluntary China. How I did this was I caused the Civil War, and then I just used my tank divisions to destroy their army, which, yeah, it cost them like 80 million lives. But anyways.
To attempt and tax as much income from people living in their territory as possible. Competition will eventually come into the picture as states attempt to exert their influence over a greater amount of resources, and competition can't exist in an environment of competing states because states are fundamentally coercive organizations.
Competition can't exist between states because they'll
Yeah, states don't compete to have people come live there and spend money and vacation and open up their businesses, move their factories, start industries. They don't have tax incentives for businesses because these things don't exist because they're all states.
yeah.
Wow.
I can't even address this just because it's absurd, and it's absurd on its face.
You're saying that competition can't exist between organizations, whether coercive or not. I just like.
Why do we have immigration? Why do we have immigration coming in through the southern border? Clearly, that something about that our government is doing is.
I don't believe there is anything in the definition of competition that requires it to be between voluntary organizations or be voluntary at all. You can have competition that is not voluntary, that is not, with voluntary organizations.
Yeah,
Like there's nothing
yes.
in the definition of competition or even economic competition that implies that it must be between non-coercive organizations.
I don't know if you guys saw this, but at the end of last year, Liechtenstein was being accused for being a tax haven for businesses and the rich by the rest of the Europeans. This kind of just disproves that there can't be competition between states.
Yeah.
Just. What was it, Monaco? It was one of the small micro-states in Europe that was being accused of this, and it was just like, yeah, this is, it's just true, and when you have more states, which implies smaller states because there's a limited amount of land.
Well, Switzerland did that with their banking. That's why everybody had all the rich people had Swiss bank accounts so they could tax dodge. That's competition.
Yep.
Yeah, no, the Panama Papers, if you remember that from a couple years ago.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be controversial to say this, but apparently it is to these left libertarians. So.
I need their definition of competition. I'm having a true Rod moment right now.
Yeah, it won't be pure voluntary competition like it would be in a market, but there is competition there.
Yeah, there is competing organizations that that is a thing that exists. So,
Alright. Yeah.
all right, yeah, I'm gonna let that go.
All right.
I kind of like, we're still only like 30% through the video, and we're like almost 2 hours in. So
Yeah.
Therefore, it's in the interest of governments to create secessionist movements to compete with each other and attract taxpayers, and increasingly privatize as much state property as possible in order to create as many resources as possible. I am not making this up. We'll be posting links to all the cited material in the pinned comment, so if you want to go and check Democracy the God That Failed for
that never
yourself...
happened. They did not post those links, as far as I'm aware.
Yep. Nothing.
Yeah, isn't that interesting?
Yeah. So
Yep.
did not happen.
Where them links at?
So I'm going to find the links and put it in my description right now. So can you guys talk while I do that?
Yeah, can you
Just play while you do it.
Yeah, hit play.
I don't.
Can you hit play on the video, Cole?
Yeah.
Go ahead, I am in no way mischaracterizing what he said.
Hop's argument that smaller political bodies are less oppressive is not accurate. See North Korea for a modern example.
One second. I
Not
just.
necessarily less oppressive per se, like always in every single instance. The idea is that
We've talked
you have-
about this.
yeah, we can just that's
Yeah,
fine.
yeah. This is what I was referring to by they don't understand ceteris paribus.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Or compared to what is even just another another economic way to look at this.
Yeah, like we just said, we've said this about 12 times already. You know, just because a state is smaller doesn't mean it's necessarily better. But as a result of secession and creating those smaller states, things are better in general for everyone.
Yeah. Do you think South Korea would be better if they had to
Right.
unify with North Korea?
Exactly.
Anyways.
Even ignoring that totalitarian hellhole, more numerous political bodies means more potential geopolitical rivals that require greater degrees of plundering of the domestic population to fund militaries states
True.
need to defend against.
So your logical conclusion is happening because globalism.
Yeah, and it's just absurd here because, you know, the more freer the state is, the better it's able to compete, and therefore the more viable it will be against large statist organizations, unless they're making the argument that the state organization is better at doing military exercises than the free market would be. I'd like to see them say that to my McNuke.
Yeah, no, it's yeah, it was who was it? Eisenhower back in the 50s just said we should get rid of the military and just have a nuclear arsenal.
Yeah, and this is again evidenced. This is again evidenced by the fact that, you know, the United States military uses PMCs like aggressively, and they use them in Iraq and they use them in Afghanistan, and the reason is because they're much more efficient at doing the job than the military is.
Yeah, there's actually a paper by someone that shows that they were more efficient than the state military. So yeah, it's I'm just gonna post this. I'm just gonna copy this link address. It's a PDF, but yeah, no, this is something you would think an ANCAP would know about. But yeah, it's in the description. It's a .mil because the military actually figured this out. But let's go ahead.
Yeah.
Against each other. The threat of possible imminent attack from neighbors raises the price of protection, which means greater tax and regulatory burdens on their captive population. Now, let's take a look at the economics of secession, specifically the incentives of the political body the secessionists seek separation from. During the feudal era, favors, allegiances, honor, and station what was important to the well-being of economic actors. Following the Protestant Reformation and the mainstreaming of the gunpowder revolution, new technology, such as what the aforementioned gunpowder was useful for, made having large armies more profitable than ever. Armies could now more effectively dominate larger battlefields and control greater territory. However, large armies are expensive and need to be funded somehow. Taxes seem like the obvious choice, but as you might imagine, sustenance farmers don't have much in the way of production to tax. That's where the technology I mentioned earlier comes in. With the printing press, the cost of copying books plummeted, allowing more people greater access to literature, which leads to skyrocketing literacy rates, which led to people being more productive, as knowledge was now more easily preserved and more communicable. As more people learned more high-skilled jobs, this led to greater productivity. Greater productivity means more resources to tax, which allows governments to fund giant armies. You see how this is going? Governments now had an incentive to maximize productivity in their land so that they may have the largest armies, not only to keep their taxed livestock alive, but to potentially dominate others in the future and gain their taxed livestock. Now, the simplest way to increase productivity is, of course, to have the most territory that can be developed, in addition to having the largest population. More people who are productive means more taxes, which means bigger armies. As such, the incentive of a government is to make sure as many people remain captive within their territory as possible. How would a state react if 1/4 of their captive tax cattle go, "Nah, I don't want to associate with this political body anymore"? This isn't an academic question. We saw what they would do, such as during the War of Northern Aggression, known colloquially as the American Civil War, initiated by the United States because the Confederate States did not pay the tariff revenue Washington, D.C. claimed they owed them.
Credit where it's due there. 100% that, they called it the War of Northern Aggression. I would agree more with Rothbard in calling it the War for Southern Independence. And, we can get into the idea here that this is, it wasn't necessarily all about tariffs. I will be the first one to admit it. It was about slavery as well. But slavery was the straw that broke the camel's back. It wasn't the start of this. And, when you have a military base, if you have a Chinese military base in Texas, and you get fired on because you won't leave, that's kind of your fault, right?
Well, it's Hoppe points this out in one of the lectures I was watching in preparation for this. The South was actually 80% of the federal government's taxes, so it wasn't just the South leaving. It was 80% of their tax base leaving. It was
and they were only 25% of the population.
Yeah, so. This is why Hoppe actually never wants a big like the South to secede again, because he knows it's going to be violent and it's going to be. So that's why in the 90s he's talked about cities leaving, where you would just have like Austin, Texas leaving the Union or something like that, or you would have Or you'd have delegitimization of the federal government, leading to states being able to break away because the federal government just collapses like it did in the Soviet Union.
Yeah, and also the claim that they made that that they want to maximize like the state wants to maximize productivity within a territory, just so they could tax them more, but also taxes hurt the productivity of the manufacturers and of the entire economy itself. So I'm not sure if that is like a perfect argument right there. I'd say it's not a terrible one by any means.
Right.
But I'm not sure if governments want to maximize productivity just so they can tax them more and build a larger army. There are a lot of factors outside of that that could be considered, other than just maximizing productivity and collecting more taxes.
Right. So this is called in EU4 and other grand strategies, playing wide or playing tall. So playing wide is you conquer a bunch of territory. Playing tall is when you develop that territory and just become richer through just more productivity. And so, yeah, that it's essentially just you're becoming, you have to balance trying to expand your territory, as well as making your territory more more productive. Because you'll notice that Germany in World War II, it took on France, it took on Britain, it took on the Soviet Union, it took on America. And yes, it did lose the war, but it basically required the rest of the world to gang up on it. And this is because Germany didn't centralize until the 18th century and the 19th century. It was very, very politically anarchic.
Yeah, it was a very anarchic system, where with many mini states that are now just all Germany.
Yeah.
And this explains a lot why Rothbard is a bit of a Germanophile.
Yeah, so it's where was I going with this? So it's not just the fact that you need to get more territory, because look at India. India was a huge state, but a smaller, more productive state that was Great Britain just took over all of it within like 50 years. It didn't do this by the weight of its inexhaustive armies. It did it because it was more productive and could facilitate the technology. Because it's always productivity that allows you to develop better and better technology. It's not technology just doesn't come out of the ether. You have to have you need to have the capital and the productivity to allow you to have technologists in the first place.
I don't know how it's not an admission of secession being legitimate to call it the War of Northern Aggression in your video.
Right. So.
Right.
I think that's them trying to give our arguments a little leeway, but credit where it's due.
I give that credit where it's due, but I'm saying if you're saying that the North is aggressive in the war,
inherently contradictory.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. You have to accept that the South was correct, status as it may be, to declare their independence.
Well, maybe they're saying that it wasn't a libertarian secession or something like that, or they weren't trying to achieve libertarian ends, and that would be like where their argument would still be that
but
secession isn't a viable libertarian strategy or something. I'm just trying to figure out.
No, that's fine. I'm trying to be fair. That's fine.
But it would be interesting to say that someone has the right to secede, based on you being a libertarian, saying someone has the right to secede, or people has the right to secede, but then turning around and saying, "Oh, it's not libertarian to be for secession." Like, if you have the right to do something, it is libertarian to do it. It's. I don't know what else to really say.
Right. You can hit play. I guess I'm good. Is everyone else good?
Yeah, I'm good.
Yeah. Well, I shouldn't say it is libertarian to do. It's just there's nothing inherently wrong with you being a libertarian if you do it.
I love this painting. I love how the Yankees are just getting their fucking asses kicked in this painting, and there's like no Southerners who are keeled over, but you just see all these fucking
except for this
Yankees
dude.
In this. Where is it? Yeah, true.
No, he's looking at the sky thinking God. That's what he's doing there. Thank God I get to kill these fucking Yankees.
Yep. So, let's go ahead.
We saw this more recently with the Catalonia region in Spain, where the Greater Spanish government claimed a referendum on whether or not people wanted Catalonian independence was illegal, barring separatists from entering polling places, confiscating ballot boxes, and arresting secessionist politicians and leaders. The state sees secessionism as a direct threat to their ability to assert power, and will come down on secession.
So, I think we all admit that. But violence is the state, and we know that already. That's what the state does.
Right.
Right.
So if the state isn't trying, like, if you have a praxis for creating a libertarian society, if the state is not fighting against that, it basically means that you're not a threat.
Right. Whether politically, economically, or through violence. I mean, those are all relevant.
Right. So it's, if you're yeah, you're just going to support ineffective means of creating a libertarian society if you're only using means that the state won't actively fight against.
Right, exactly. So your argument against secession being a good libertarian praxis is that the state won't like it very much or something.
Yeah, it's
God forbid.
right, and it's not always true that it requires violence. Poland broke away from the Soviet Union without violence. So it's just not true that it always.
Yeah, the entire Soviet structure collapsed, and that provided a major amount of secessionist freedom in the creation of those new Baltic and new Eastern European states.
Right, and cities in Europe actually formed on the boundaries of feudal kingdoms to get away from the tax structure of feudalism. Hoppe goes into that at the end of Democracy, the God That Fails. He also goes into that in a bunch of different lectures. I'll try to put links to all the things I watched later on. But yeah, let's go ahead. We're about halfway through, and we're about an hour and 2 hours and 20 minutes.
So can you, when you get to it, can you pause at 1840?
Yeah, but I think we're gonna pause before that. So.
Yeah, no, I'm just saying when you get there.
Secessionists hard. Why not? It's in their economic incentive to do so, as their tax cattle leaving means they have a harder time financing themselves. Now, one may look at this and think, hey, secession directly hurts the state's ability to assert force and collect resources. This is an effective strategy. I can see why one would come to that conclusion from what I just said, and strictly speaking, they're not wrong. Trouble is that the same incentive that drives states toward consolidation and conquest.
Because one side always loses.
Right.
Yep. It's not necessarily true that one side wins. White
Actually,
pieces...
like one side always loses or nobody wins. like that's your argument towards like governments being efficient at warfare? Like, yeah, they might do it a lot, but it doesn't make them good at it. They're terrible at it.
Yeah, it's also the thing with the secessionist movement state becoming territory expansion is that it's going to already have states around it by definition of having seceded, and so
Right.
and so it's going to have to go up against another state. It's not just going to go against random people or just like a libertarian society. So I don't really understand what the argument is, because the thing is that, as he described earlier, if you have a larger territory, you have a larger tax base, and so the army is definitely going to be weaker in any secessionist state, any successful secessionist state. So
Yeah, I would say that I want to make the point here that there is definitely a difference between increasing a tax base and expropriating other things, and states do both, right? You don't necessarily have to increase your tax base to increase your the state's material holdings. It can just expropriate more other things, right? It can impose tariffs and things like that. It can take land. Look at China; you can't even own land, right? They use those material and mineral resources to increase their profitability. I'm not saying that isn't a form of theft. It absolutely is theft, but it's not inherently taxes, right?
right, it's just yeah, it's And it can even increase over time, like in a monarchy, where you allow a free market, and then just your 1% tax just becomes bigger and bigger over time. So,
All cases, the seceded power will be smaller and weaker than that which they left from, making them vulnerable to coercion, conquest, and re-annexation. The best you can hope for is a return to the status quo, and at worst, it sparks a massive, bloody war that sets back social and technological advancement a full generation, at the cost of hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of lives and broken families. As it is a direct threat to their wealth and power, governments are incentivized to take any measure to prevent freelance violence from proliferating, which is entirely what secessionism is. Freelancers in violence, seeking their...
So I missed this part of the video. I really wanted to speak to this, but a minute ago when he's talking about the printing press and things like that, he already went over that, right?
yep.
Yeah. So that is the best Ted K argument I have ever heard anyone ever make, and these guys aren't even anprims. Like, okay, yes, technological advancement creates a higher level of equality. Therefore, we should eliminate technological advancement so that we eliminate equality, right?
That's hilarious because the last episode of the book club, I literally said the printing press was a mistake.
So I mean, like they've unintentionally made the best Ted K argument I have ever heard. Literally, that's the best Anprim argument I've ever heard.
Yep. Yeah, no, it's... Do you have anything to say about what he just said, though?
No. Sorry, I just wanted to make that point. I had it written down, and I had to use the restroom when you guys were talking about that.
Okay.
I mean, I don't have anything to address the point he made specifically, but one thing we haven't talked about this whole time about with regards to secession or why it would be preferable is in the reference to the COVID stuff that we're going through now with the national lockdowns and a lot of the rules. I mean, we saw how political decentralization in general, with states making their own, like a lot of states and governors having their own rules and different rules. I mean, would that not is that not preferable to having a one size fits all solution?
And you'll see that if this keeps going on, right, and different states react in different ways with different governors, you'll see people move. People will move and leave. It will happen.
Yeah.
And those states that are more free and don't have the COVID lockdown restrictions will be more profitable. Maine, I'm fairly certain I just saw this on the internet, that Maine had 41% business bankruptcies. That's catastrophic. You don't think that those businesses are going to move to states that allow them to reopen? They're definitely going to move.
Yeah, I've seen tons of people who've lived in bigger cities and in bigger areas like New York and California stuff saying they're getting out of there. They're moving to somewhere, more rural, moving out of the city, moving out. I mean, this shows you right here that policies and have an effect on where people want to live. And so having those policies dictated in a larger geographical region is less preferable than having competing states. However, they're still states, yes, and it's not Ancapistan. It's I don't see how from this example, especially with the COVID stuff, it's not clear that people respond to incentives.
Right. And I think, the counter argument that they would make to this is, well, then why do you support borders? Well, because I don't want the same people that imposed those problems to begin with and then fled to come into my community and cause the same problems.
Yeah, just because they leave doesn't make them a net benefit to my territory.
Right.
Or
We're just saying that people are going to leave, and then there will be some good people that come as well. So there'll be bad and good that leave, right? It's just all the good people that are going to leave.
Yep. So...
their own geographical monopoly. The secessionists...
Oh, he did say that with secession you're either hoping for the status quo or you're going to have a big war, and that's just not true, as can be seen with the War of 1812. The Great Britain did try to bring America back into the fold, and they just couldn't.
Right. Yeah, and it happens all the time. I mean, look at look at the Soviets, right? When they decentralized, it was okay. Well, do you want the status quo, or do you want these decentralized? There was no war between the states when the Soviet Union collapsed. I mean, so should we make everything? I mean, I'm not saying that we should make everything communist. Are making that argument that we should make everything a large world state that is communist, and then as a result, natural secession will happen? No, they're just saying secession itself is bad. So why? Doesn't make sense.
Yeah. It also forget where I was going with this, but it's not necessarily true that a smaller state will lose to a bigger state. Like, look at Afghanistan.
Right, exactly. There are numerous, hundreds of examples of guerrilla warfare being, again, ceteris paribus, but all things being equal, just because you're larger and you have a more imposing military doesn't mean that you're going to be better and win. There are lots of examples of the counter to that. Now, we're also saying in conjunction with that since those smaller entities would be naturally or more presupposed to be freer economically, they would be able to better compete with larger centralized states that are inefficient.
Right. So Germany has a larger economy than Russia.
Right.
Like it's a smaller state, but it has a better thing. Going back to my World War II example, it took so many people to combat Germany just because of how rich it was, just generally because of the political decentralization that it happened. Happened in Germany.
And we haven't even really addressed this point yet. Maybe we shouldn't, because it could open up a whole new can of worms. But about the knowledge problem of trying to central plan and knowing exactly what like trying to central plan resources from Washington D.C. or something. Like the same is true about maybe just trying to do it from if it was a state the size of like North Carolina that seceded or something, you'd have a similar problem with like kind of grasping in the dark, not having market forces if you were a state. But you'd have the results would be a lot closer, I think, if you were just doing it from like a population and an economy that size versus doing it for 350 million people.
Right.
Yeah.
And going back to the World War II example, I mean, okay, yeah, Russia did quote unquote win the war with help of everybody else, but look how much they lost because Germany was obviously more capitalist than Russia was at the time. So it's absurd to me to think that just because you're a larger state with a larger population and an overwhelming military force, that you're going to win. That is not a set conclusion.
Right. And this is the thing with the gunpowder revolution. It's not the larger states that are now better. It's the richer armies that are better.
Right. Well,
Because
the ones that are more efficient. That's why the United States is so powerful, is because we're economically free. That quote unquote free. We're more economically free than communist countries, right? And we have had embraced that for a very long time. That's why the United States, with its large size, large tax base, with its large material wealth resources, and that general level of freedom economically, is so powerful. Not because it is in itself large.
Yeah, so yeah, this is how should I put this? The reason why the ritual argument is so important is because like if you're richer, you can have tanks, you can have mechanized vehicles, you can have all these things that really do improve your chances of winning a war.
And new technologies breed that, right? And capitalism, as a result, creates new technologies that advance society and advance your ability to wage war.
Yep. So, let's continue.
Is not responsible at all for how violently their former rulers react, and Hop most certainly does not want people to die. The principle is sound. People have a right to freely associate, and that includes...
I have a feeling this is going to be copyrighted right here. So I'm going to be stopping about a little bit less than every 10 seconds.
Okay.
disassociation, especially from criminal enterprises like states, through creating additional criminal enterprises.
Well, yeah, we've already addressed.
Yeah, we've addressed this at length.
Yep.
Though if one is interested in a pragmatic shift away from states, it is the state that needs to be changed, or the creation of additional states.
Wait.
It is the state that needs to be changed, or the creation of additional states. But the mega-political conditions that allows for centralization...
Did you just hear that? Or the creation of additional states?
Yeah,
Like,
I was saying that's what secession effectively does, is creates additional states.
yeah, I'm not sure if that's just a error in their script. So,
It may have just been misspeaking.
yeah.
and violence to be as profitable as it is. New technology, such as the internet...
So hold up. Violence is not profitable. It is the opposite. War is the destruction of value.
Well, violence is profitable typically to the one that wins.
Not really. I would probably disagree with you on that, because that money that's being spent to wage that war, it would be better spent on more marketable things that would increase your own material wealth. War is pretty destructive.
Because in order to fund, you're having to take resources out of the voluntary sector,
Right.
which is clearly just what people have demonstrated they want to fund, and you're funding like a military thing that doesn't benefit them.
But no one would do this if it wasn't profitable.
Well, no, it's not on net forever. It's in the same way the breaking the window is profitable to the glass repairman.
Right.
Oh,
It's
no.
not profitable on net to the community.
Right, that's what I'm saying though. Is that
Okay, yeah. It's profitable to like yes. Obviously, we wouldn't be waging these wars in the Middle East if it wasn't profitable to someone. But it's not profitable to the American people, even if we seized resources or whatever. Like we don't profit on net the community or the nation.
Let's see. I'm going to actually, instead of stopping every so often, I'm gonna try to download.
And put up another video.
Yeah.
Wait, why are you? What are you afraid is copyrighted? This fucking the screensaver?
Yeah, it is.
It is. It's the last time they did something like this was part of a music video that they just cut the music out.
Oh.
So let me figure out how to get something.
Just black the screen out, can't you, or something? Or yeah, there you go. Perfect. Just play the audio with that up.
There you go.
Perfect.
Damn it. It did not want to work. Oh, never mind. Sorry. I'm going to do this off screen and
Just
then
hit
bring
play and switch to another tab, right?
I'm going to change something, so can I download this? Yes. Sorry about this, guys. I tried to set this up beforehand, but it just did not happen.
We need to create some separate background videos for the different discussions that we have anyway, so maybe we can have one of our friends do that.
Yep. Okay, can I make this always loop? Yep. Alright, and then I'm gonna take this and do another browser source. Or is it display capture? No. Yes, sorry guys, I should have had this set up beforehand, but I just didn't.
You're okay, man.
So, I'm more talking to chat, because I know we have a couple people watching.
So what's the deal with airline food?
Okay, Jerry.
Yep. So this is what it's gonna look like for now. It should be. Why is it not?
You may have to stop and restart the stream.
Oh no, it's That's interesting. It's not showing the video at all.
All right, what I see right now is the same video we've been watching.
Right, that shouldn't even be up as an option, which is interesting.
On the stream, it's a black screen.
What? On YouTube?
On YouTube, it's a black screen.
Oh, then it's working. Can you play the video?
Yeah. So what I'm gonna do is just have that black screen there for the rest of the time, and at least until this graphic goes away.
Microprocessing, CNC machines, and 3D printing, as well as cryptocurrency, are fundamentally altering how people associate and organize, especially as more economic assets, value, and production is centered in cyberspace, creating a jurisdiction problem when digital goods can be effectively teleported anywhere in the world to where it is cheapest to produce them.
This is the what Rothbard talked about margin, the focus on the margins. This is the margin of the economy, because you can't grow food on the internet, you can't create cars on the internet, you can't do a great many things on the internet. So this isn't a strategy for the vast majority of people. This is a strategy for a limited minority of
Right.
people.
Yeah. The idea that you can alternatively socially organize large and mass production
Through purely digital means.
Yeah, I don't think that's. I don't think it's viable. I could definitely be proven wrong, but I don't think that it's such an inferior solution,
Right.
on the face to secession that I just don't think it's possible.
Right, and this is basically what they're talking about, basically techno-agorism. So.
This alters the relationship between the state and citizens, making legislation and taxation significantly more difficult and costly, if not outright impossible, to enforce. This reduces the economic returns on initiating violence against peaceful people, creating economic pressure on the state to downscale significantly.
Okay, so let's talk about that real quick.
Significant.
So that's not true at all. The state will do everything in its power, as they just said, in counter to secession, to quell to quell that ability. And look what they did to Ross, right? Look what they did to him. They put him in prison for life. And that's what they'll continue to do to people, is they'll continue to try and shut these things down. Look at crypto now. They even when they know that they can't or shouldn't stop something, they're just going to adopt it and use it against us. That's what the state has done. There are numerous examples online of the CIA getting millions and millions and millions of dollars in crypto. Do you think that they're going to not use that to expand the power of the state?
Yep.
Right.
Just seems like a totally inferior argument, or at least counter to their own argument, to argue that secession is bad because the state will use violence against you. Well, yeah, and they're going to use violence against agorists too. Duh. But at least if you're a secessionist movement, you can fight back and will have the economic incentive to do so.
Yep.
Yep, exactly.
Agreed wholeheartedly.
100%. And it's not necessarily debunking Hoppe. Per se, like going after argumentation ethics, something he developed, makes sense if you're trying to critique Hoppe, but you're just critiquing him through the lens of critiquing the concept of secessionism or something. And it's like, I mean, it's not like exclusive to him, so it's not really like you dunked on him. You're just kind of, like.
Yeah, I mean, I guess
you're saying it's not going to work in a strategy. It's like, well, you could say the same thing about agorism, like.
Right. Yeah. I guess if you're going to attack someone or try to refute them, you need to approach all of their primary positions. Maybe that's the lens that they're coming through on this on, but it doesn't make their critiques are equally as applicable to their solutions as Hoppe's.
Right. They're just kind of arguing from like a consequentialist point anyway. It's almost like an anarcho-communist arguing that anarcho-capitalism will never be achieved. And it's like, okay, maybe not, but neither is your stupid fucking thing. So
Yeah.
it's like, at least the thing we advocate for is more preferable. Like, you didn't make it, it's just dumb to me.
All right, let's do it.
Oh, I was taking this time to mess with the windows.
Oh, okay.
Because I'm almost to the point where I can actually have something, so it would be... I'm just going to create I just have a loop here. There we go. So now that we have the loop here, and I'm going to bring this down, we no longer need this. And the hell is this? Aha! We can also remove that. Okay. So this is the Hoppean Book Club
There we go.
loop.
Yep, looks great.
Cool. All right, let's go.
Significantly or collapse. Then, only then, would secessionism be a pragmatic solution to avoiding state control, as they would be powerless to stop secessionists. If you're
What?
then, only then, would secessionism be a or downscale significantly, and I mean very significantly, or collapse. Then, only
Okay, I have no idea what the hell he's talking about.
this reduces the economic returns on initiating violence against peaceful people, creating economic pressure on the state to downscale significantly, and I mean very significantly, or collapse. Then, only then, would secessionism be a pragmatic solution to avoiding state control, as they would be powerless to stop secessionists. If you're participating in technological innovation and modes of commerce that subvert the state's rule, well, it's too late. You're not a secessionist. You're an agorist.
Hoppe creates a few issues.
Secessionists are the real agorists.
No, agorists are the real secessionists.
Real secessionism has never been tried.
But yeah. Anyway, I can't even.
Who will grow the fruits?
Also, this is your 1840 stop, so just so you know.
Yeah, what they're talking about here is that you're not causing the state to collapse here as a result of that. It's just not going to happen, and you're not an agorist in doing those things. You're just a capitalist. That's all you're doing, is providing the free market resources, or the ability to use the free market without state intervention. Yes, that's great, awesome. No qualms with that at all. It's the other subversive bullshit that we have a problem with.
Right, and in my article, I show how agorism, it can't be a true quote-unquote free market free of coercion because of the inherent risk and violence that has to happen, because there cannot be a legal system, because the state will just crash down on any court. And digital forms of black markets can be free of violence, but that's because there's almost no risk to it.
Right.
But because the reason why there's no risk is there's no physical goods, and there cannot be a entire market economy based on a lack of physical goods, because you need things to eat.
Yeah, I think they'd probably counter with that and say, well, drugs are physical goods, and we were buying and selling goods on,
Have you not noticed the Mexican cartels?
Right, exactly, and how violent and how horrifying those people become as a result of that. Without order, there can be no justice. There can be no peace. And this is what I don't want to straw man them, but I would probably say that they're very anti-order and very anti-hierarchy, obviously. So how are you going to deal with the issues of personal violence and not state violence?
Right. And how is the cartelization of the black market, which inevitably happens, how is that not different from a state?
Right. Well, and how is it less violent than a state? I mean, it may be on a scale less violent, but it is still inherently more violent
Right.
than peaceful secession.
Right, but
Yeah,
if the Mexican cartels overtook the Mexican government and just became a Mexican government, not just de facto but de jure, do you not think that it would be more violent? Did I break up there?
No, yeah, I get what you're saying.
Yeah.
And one I think really great way to sum up the kind of whole thing is that we're not just opposed to the state in some arbitrary way where we just hate or we don't like the government as like our first principle. So like therefore everything it does must be bad or something. Like we're opposed to violence necessarily, and the state operates off violence, but they're not the only institution that does. The difference is people don't view private crimes as legitimate, where they view the state aggression as legitimate. So therefore, secession is a demonstration of believing that the state ruling over you currently is illegitimate.
Right.
So like that's why I support secession, and I think it is a great libertarian strategy. Is because if someone gets mugged in the park, people think that's wrong. But if the tax man comes to your door, people, because of the indoctrination, believe that this is a just act because of thinking that the state can commit violence. By seceding, it's a territory saying we don't view the state as legitimate. And the more people who don't view a government as legitimate is like I feel like a good thing overall.
So there's another argument they could make. They could say that you could have a subsistence farm. The issue with this is that an agri-subsistence farm, it destroys the division of labor and is necessarily going to impoverish people. And it's going to be a very, very hard sell to a factory worker or someone else to give up all of the benefits that the division of labor and the specialization of labor gives to him just to try to destroy the state.
Yep.
So that's why I don't anyways.
Hoppe creates a few issues with how he characterizes the interests of states, and how he argues that states act upon those interests, to put it mildly. Firstly, Hoppe assumes that the only consistent ways which states are able to expropriate resources is through the taxation of income. This is incredibly easy to disprove with a load of historical data and even a few modern examples. For instance, the highest tax rate on income or individually owned assets under the Roman Empire in the entire history of its existence was 3%. The highest for the Soviet Union was never more than 20%. And
Compared to what?
Well, the thing is that an export tax or an import tax is kind of a income tax. A business tax is somewhat of a income tax. It's an income tax on the business owner. Property tax isn't, it is an income tax. This is why the Whiskey Rebellion happened, because it wasn't technically a income tax, but it essentially was. All taxes are exploitative of productivity, and your productivity is your income.
Yeah, I mean, okay, your marginal tax rate is lower. The state is still expropriating value because the USSR, they had a 20% tax or whatever he just said, but you couldn't even own land. The state owned the land, and it extracted the value from legitimate property owners in a roundabout way. And states always do this, and they will do that in any means they can through outright slavery.
Yeah, another example of Cities Paribus.
Yeah, exactly. It
It's
is.
like all things weren't equal. It's like you're just
Right.
talking about the.
Yeah.
Let him continue. It's just absurd on its face.
Yep.
Nazi Germany, along with several empires in feudal Europe throughout the Middle Ages, don't or didn't even have taxes on income. The reason for this
Based.
is ironically due to something which Hoppe himself noted.
In principle, in taxing and regulating private economy owners and market income earners, all
Did you hear that?
Private commie owners.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah. I think it's a misspeak, but it's funny.
in taxing and regulating private economy owners and market income earners, all governments are counterproductive. They reduce market participation in the formation of economic wealth. Once the existence of a government has been assumed, however, no direct relationship between territorial size and economic integration exists.
Right. No direct, absolute correlation.
Yep. It's
There's context here.
right, and you could imagine. Let's take the example of France. France on its east was had a bunch of small states to it, and to its south it had 3 states to it because Spain didn't unify for a while as well. And so France is, even though it is a bigger state, it's going to have competition based on its surrounding states.
Yeah, so can I read the rest of the Hoppe quote here to put this in context?
Yeah.
I was about to offer it anyway. I have the page open right now.
Yeah, so after he finishes there, the relationship between territorial size and economic integration exists. One second. Where did I just lose the place? No, in principle, in taxing and regulating, expropriating private property owners and market income earners, all governments are counterproductive. They reduce market participation and formation of economic wealth. Once the existence of a government has been assumed, however, there is no direct relationship between territorial size and economic integration exists. Switzerland and Albania are both small countries, but Switzerland exhibits a high degree of economic integration, whereas Albania does not. Both the United States and the former Soviet Union are large. Yet, while there is much division of labor and market participation in the United States, in the Soviet Union, there was virtually no private capital ownership. There was hardly any economic integration. Centralization, then, can go hand in hand with either economic progress or retrogression. Progress results whenever a less taxing and regulating government expands its territory at the expense of a more expropriative one. If the reverse occurs, centralization implies economic disintegration and retrogression. So, beyond that, he goes on to say, yet a highly important indirect relationship between size and economic integration. A central government ruling a large-scale territories, much less single world government, cannot come into existence ab ovo. Instead, all institutions with the power to tax and regulate the owners of private property must start out small. Smallness contributes to moderation. However, a small government has many close competitors, and if it taxes and regulates its own subjects visibly more than the competitors do, it is bound to suffer from immigration with an E and corresponding loss of future revenue. So it's very important there to understand the context of what Hoppe is talking about.
Also,
Go ahead.
Also, they did quote part of that, but they only quoted the part that Slovenia and Albania are close in size, and that Slovenia and Austria are close in size, and the USSR and USA are close in size. They didn't get the end of that, and I think the reason why they quoted this, then that second part, and then didn't quote the third part, is because Hoppe actually clarifies what he's talking about.
Right, exactly.
Right.
It's
like cherry picking. It's selective.
It is. It's very cherry picked. It doesn't make sense in this context. And when I first watched the video, I was like, that doesn't fucking make sense. What the hell are they talking about? So I went and looked this up, and I've read this before. You can look. It's not only in Democracy, the Guy That Failed, in page 109, but it's also in a article that Hoppe had wrote called "Nationalism and Secession."
Well-
There's a PDF out there.
Well, nationalism and secession is actually what they quoted earlier. And it's kind of interesting that they went to Democracy, the God That Failed, to just go a paragraph beforehand.
Right.
So it's... Yeah, it's... Also, this kind of goes back to what I said, is that Hoppe and Rothbard would write articles and then just turn those into chapters in a book.
Right. So let me read one more little paragraph from Nationalism and Secession, and it's an example. Could a father do to his son, or a mayor to his village, for instance? Could a father, or what the government of the Soviet Union did to its subjects, i.e., deny them any right to private capital ownership, or what governments all across Western Europe and the United States do to their system or citizens, i.e., expropriate up to 50% of their productive output? Obviously not. Either there would be an immediate revolt and the government would be overthrown, or an immigration to another nearby household or village would ensue. This is the context in which this is being spoken about. That, you know, that even though there is no direct correlation, obviously on a smaller scale, it causes immigration and capital movement. That's what Hoppe is getting at here.
You're right, and then he goes on to say, and that's because it's also in Democracy, the God That Failed, that little piece, that with a footnote that political competition then is a far more effective device for limiting a government's natural desire to expand its exploitative powers than are the internal constitutional limitations. So, you know, just you talk about like compared to what thing, it's like you can write and enshrine something in a large central government that says you can't do this and that, but having those competing political entities, like having more borders per se, like more states, is a way to combat it naturally, without having to, or it's more effective rather than relying on some sort of like enshrined document.
Right. It's just like, are they arguing that economic incentives don't apply to states?
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
that's what it sounds like.
That's the whole thing we clarified earlier, which is that people respond to incentives. Like, it's clear that you can, whatever their quote was earlier, that states can't compete with each other, whatever he said, because they're statist in nature or something. And it's just they clearly can. They clearly can.
Yeah, he's saying because they're coercive in nature that they can't compete with each other. And what Jared just said, where they can't respond to economic incentives, is they might be confusing Mises's argument with, you know, that economic calculation is impossible under socialism, with they can't make, you know, any sort of response to economic incentives, or respond to, or even have their own, you know, incentives themselves. I'm not sure.
Just the decentralization point with the knowledge thing, it's just like, and the economic calculation problem. If you know, a small state, you know, like Georgia or something, had to produce you know, some sort of good, it doesn't matter what, for its citizens, it would have a better idea, like the governor would have a better idea of the quantity or the what people would prefer. And it wouldn't be great, obviously, it would not be like a free market, but then if it was being decided from DC for all of the country.
Yeah. I mean, again, ceteris paribus, all things being equal, the lower taxed and regulated burdens that are imposed by a government, the larger the population tends to grow, the larger the amount of wealth that is created. That I don't see how that's at all not understood here.
Yep.
I just think that it's a very strange claim to make.
So what is a strange claim to make?
They're alluding to, I guess they're not exactly making a claim per se, whether, you know, government, well, they might be, that governments can't compete, or that they can't like respond to incentives. I think it's a really weird claim.
Yeah, they said that in our time about half an hour ago, that There can be no competition in coercive
Yeah,
institutions.
yeah, and I addressed that. I just think it's really weird. You would have to make a serious case for that.
Yep. I did put down the loop just so that they could see the quote. So I'm gonna put the loop back on and stop playing.
Governments as organizations don't operate around market signals to obtain their funding, and therefore by nature are economically parasitic. They have a paradoxical relationship with their subjects' resources contrasted with their own interests. The more resources a government systemically appropriates, the less profitable it becomes for people who are subjugated by their state to associate within their legal market.
To Hop, since a democratic state has allowed everyone, on principle, to become rulers, the natural aristocracy has been effectively eradicated. If the state were to disappear tomorrow, there would be no arbitrators to resolve disputes, resulting in chaos. Hence, secessionism is meant not only to shrink territories and encourage governments to become less oppressive by making it easier for people to vote with their feet by emigrating to less oppressive jurisdictions, but it's also meant to buy time for the natural aristocracy to return. Trouble is,
So pause
the
there.
return
So
of...
this is what Colton was just talking about earlier with cartelization, right? With the cartels. We don't want that. We don't want chaos. We don't want chaos to reign, and that's what will happen if things go towards cartels, right? And this is what Hop is talking about. If we move in the mode of decentralization towards smaller states, and then eventually, more towards community and things like that, that allows for a more peaceful, over time, over a large length of time, a more peaceful conclusion.
Yeah. Back in stateless Ireland, they had lists of judges that you could resolve disputes with. You could choose someone else, but the list of judges was generally accepted by the populace to be good judges, and there would be like 5 or 6 in a county.
Right.
So it would be, you have to have that system set up, and the current status judges wouldn't be a good substitution because all of their legal knowledge is based on, essentially statist lines. Like, you don't have too many Judge Napps running around.
Right.
Even though Judge Knapp would probably be an amazing libertarian social order judge.
Yeah, he's welcome in my covenant.
Yep. So let's continue.
of the natural aristocracy, and the emergence of the natural order is just assumed to be a given, with no causal explanation for how the creation of yet more states, which could also be democratic, will nurture the re-emergence of a natural order at all. Surely more states would be just as destructive to natural aristocracies. Furthermore, the creation...
So some naturally would, but nowhere near as destructive to natural aristocracy as a global or nationally federalized government. To say that the smaller states will also be destructive towards natural aristocracies does not inherently say that they're not less destructive to natural aristocracy than a larger group.
Yeah, this whole argument, the whole entire video, basically, it could just be boiled down to compared to what. So they're arguing why small governments and small states are statist and have every problem that comes along with having a political state. But it's like, right, sure. But compared to a larger one, that's the whole thing is we're talking about the best between two bad outcomes.
Right.
It's almost like a monarchy thing of arguing why monarchy would be less preferable than a complete anarcho-capitalist private property order or something. And it's that's why you're trying to debunk Hop by saying that. It's or I'm saying that because that's what they're saying. But it's right, but he's arguing it in comparison to democracy, right? So it's right, they're arguing against why the whole video is just talking about why. They're just pointing out the general problems with statism, but it's right. But we're saying we're comparing it to like large federalism or like a globalism thing. Like
Right.
that's the whole video could just be said. Like that's there's like they can't. It's like they don't understand. I mean, I know they understand it, but it's like, well, then wouldn't you have to agree?
Yeah. Colton, what minute mark are we at?
We are at 21:20.
Yeah. So yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Yep, we've gone through quite a bit.
Sorry, let's just blow through it. I'm sorry.
Oh no, it's fine. It's just
Yeah. No. I was doing that so I could reference my notes for not saying you were talking too long.
no, yeah. So in the past 50 minutes, we've gone through 11 minutes of video, and then the beginning 2 hours, we went through 10 minutes of video.
Good. We're accelerating.
The correct type of accelerationism.
Yeah.
Creation of a large number of small governments encourages competition between governments. Government competition is reductive, meaning it takes competitors out of the market. Now, what does that mean? Increased political centralization and an increased price demanded by governments for the cost of production. But don't take my word for it.
Assuming no more than self-interest on the part of government agents, all states or all governments must be expected to make use of this monopoly and thus exhibiting a tendency toward increased exploitation. On the one hand, this means increased domestic exploitation and internal taxation. On the other hand, and it is this aspect in particular that will be of interest, it means, of course, territorial expansionism. States will always want to enlarge their exploitation and tax base. In trying to do so, however, they will come into conflict with other competing states. The competition between states as territorial monopolists of compulsion is by its very nature an eliminative competition. That is, there can be only one monopolist of exploitation and taxation in any given area, and thus the competition between different states can be expected as promoting a tendency toward increased political centralization and ultimately one single world state. A glance at Western history suffices to illustrate the validity of this conclusion. At the beginning of this millennium, for instance, Europe consisted of thousands of independent political units. Now, only several dozen such units remain in existence.
This is completely contradictory with Hobbes' view.
Hold on. Let him finish that point. I want to respond to that.
Right, I have to put the loop back up though.
Oh, sorry.
This is completely contradictory with Hobbes' view that a large number of small governments will compete with each other economically and become less oppressive, encouraging more decentralization. On page 3 of his essay, Nationalism and Secession,
It's going to be interesting to see how he tries to say that's counterintuitive. Contradictory.
Yeah, I don't understand what he's getting at here. I don't understand how it's contradictory to say that, as the progress of centralization moves towards that competition between states is naturally eliminative. Of course it is. That's the direction that it moves. And that's why we're saying that we need to move in the opposite direction.
Right.
Okay, well, are you saying that the ends here are always going to be that way? You can't prevent that. That's the opposite of strategy. He's making a historical review, or he's making a historical analysis of the way that states move. We're talking about trying to move in the other direction because naturally, as you move in the other direction, things will become less like that, and competition creates less centralized states, ultimately.
Yeah, like you said earlier, it has to be a conscious effort to move
Right.
in the other direction.
Right. I think that this is interesting to talk about the view of history because just because the natural progression of history, let's say Hopper is even talking about a natural progression of history, but even if the natural progression of history is to become more statist over time, it does not mean that we can't actively work against it. So, which is just what we said, but it's really interesting that they view that any trend towards statism automatically invalidates whatever theory it is.
Yeah. So competition itself is eliminative in that way. The point is to prevent that elimination by creating more decentralization.
Yeah, you see the same thing in the market with companies trying to, capture and take out their competitors, and the solution is more competition in
Right.
that scenario, or in the ability to compete. Abolishment of regulations that prevent competition, which is to say, with the political competition, the same rules would apply, and you would want to have the ability to secede for the same reasons.
Yep. I don't really understand what
This is I think what they're doing is they're conflating the natural inclination of states and the philosophical position that we need to move away
Right.
from that civilization.
Right, so this is also how should I put this? This is like just this is the interest of businesses versus the interest of consumers. To bring back to my example from about an hour ago. Consumers want competition. Businesses hate competition.
Right.
And so businesses will look to create regulation and to create propaganda to get people to want regulation to benefit them. However, it is the interest of the consumer to not have this regulation. So this is just the same conflict.
It's the same argument, but for secession, exactly, Colton.
Yeah. So, yeah, let's
blow through it. Let's go.
Yep.
Secession, he says, first, secession always involves the breaking away of a smaller from a larger population and is thus a vote against the principle of democracy and majoritarian ownership in favor of private decentralized property. More importantly, secession always involves increased opportunities for interregional migration, and a secessionist government is immediately confronted with the specter of immigration. To avoid the loss of its most productive subjects, it is under increased pressure to adopt comparatively liberal government policies by allowing more private property and imposing a lower tax and regulation burden than its neighbors. Ultimately, with as many territories as separate households, villages, or towns, the opportunities for economically motivated emigration would be maximized and government power over a domestic economy minimized. A Europe consisting of hundreds of distinct countries, regions, and cantons, of thousands of independent free cities, such as the present-day oddities of Monaco, San Marino, and Andorra, with the greatly
I liked how you said Monaco.
Yeah, Monaco, yeah.
increased opportunities for economically motivated migration that would be one of small liberal governments economically integrated through free trade and an international commodity money such as gold. It would be a Europe of unparalleled economic growth and unprecedented prosperity. Suffice to say...
1 second. I forgot to put the loop back on because I put the loop off to...
Secession is growth and unprecedented prosperity. Suffice to say, secessionism, according to my understanding of Hop, means governments will infringe on people's rights more and less simultaneously. Thus, it is how we achieve anarchism. And this isn't my characterization. If you're having trouble...
What did you
Yeah.
just say?
So he, again, conflation between the natural progress and wants of states in comparison to the market wants. The market, as Colton already said, it would be the citizens, therefore, of a country. They would necessarily want that competition, and states would not. It's just because states want to grow that way doesn't mean that ultimately there are more incentives for the state not to do that, right? Because, again, there are multiple different examples of large states, centralized states, moving both economically free and non-economically free, right? So the state can act independent of market signals, and it can also act in accordance with market signals.
Right, and
That's not inherently contradictive.
right. And Germany staying decentralized for as long as it did kind of shows that what Hoppe is saying is not complete hogwash. It's, you know, it doesn't always happen that you keep political decentralization, but it's entirely possible to do so.
Right. Both are possible, and as Hoppe said in the very beginning, you know, they aren't linked. Economic incentivization and political incentivization are not inherently linked, but they can be.
Yep. He also they said earlier that it's secessionists say it's going to be a positive. We need to positively do something. It's not a something that just happens on its own. So yeah, it was basically when they were trying to explain Hoppe's position that they said that. But anyways.
Squaring this circle, don't worry, you're not alone. I could reasonably guess that Hoppe is not deliberately trying to confuse people, so he has either some other information I have failed to identify that reconciles this contradiction, or he has failed to consider this. The simplest solution is that he's changed his mind over time, however I have seen no evidence for this. As such,
Okay, so what's Occam's razor? What's more likely? Hans Hermann Hoppe has failed to consider something that, or that a filthy heretic on YouTube thought about.
Yeah.
Like, fucking Christ.
You could use Jared's razor here and attribute this to maliciousness.
Yeah, we can keep playing. I'm just stop. I just thought it was funny. I'm just like, yeah, he hasn't thought about this, but I certainly have. It's like,
Yeah.
I'm sure it's for his lack of thinking about the subject for sure.
Yeah, Khalil says I get triggered every time he says hop.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
we
do. Alright, just go ahead. Sorry, you keep playing.
he has failed to recognize this contradiction in his own ideas. Though it's worth noting that Hoppe believes that free emigration would be a given. Problem is, governments can shut down borders, something Hoppe directly advocates for as part of his populist political platform. To be sure, under present all-pervasively politicized conditions and involvement in politics and party politics cannot be entirely avoided. Of course, the problem with using statist means to achieve anti-statist ends fails at the conceptual level, as discussed earlier, as your ends are inextricably linked to your means. This applies for secessionists.
They never made an argument as to why that is.
Yeah.
They're just saying that it is.
Yeah, it's just assorted, and there might be a poetic reason for it, but it's really never been argued that well. At least all the people I've seen argue for it. It's just kind of something they kind of assume, kind of like natural rights. It's just kind of assumed that you have natural rights. The is-ought gap really destroys natural rights, as we discussed last week.
Yep.
However, Hoppe created his own argumentation for natural rights, and it's so much better, and that Rothbard decided that, yeah, I'm just going to abandon all my previous arguments and just go with that.
Yeah. That really says something when Rothbard says, "Oh, I was wrong, you're right."
Yep.
Too, as it's a directly political act, the founding of additional monopolies on arbitration. But even if we are willing to ignore that, cartels of states can, and do, illegalize freelance emigration through international agreements like the passport system. That smaller governments would not close their borders, have their borders closed off by their neighbors, or even institute an expat tax, where citizens still must pay income tax regardless of their physical location, is an entirely unknowable hypothesis. To say nothing of the regime of closed borders, directly advocated for under Hoppe's populist platform in getting libertarianism right.
Rothbard wants closed borders, and that they want no immigration. In fact, in Democracy, the God That Fails, Hoppe calls for a type of immigration policy that would try to solve the tragedy of the commons that is inherent in public ownership. He also, Rothbard wants immigration through decentralization, where different states and then counties and then city blocks and then eventually households get to decide who immigrates where.
Right, and this goes back to the basics of private property, right? So I don't get the point here, but
yeah. So also, if let's say Liechtenstein's borders do get closed off by Austria and Switzerland, it would be devastating to the economy of Liechtenstein. So it's not something that's going to keep, it's not going to be something that keeps on happening. The state Liechtenstein is going to want to reopen the borders just to have better trade opportunities. Also, let's look at what is it? There's a small communist state that's next to Moldova. It's Transnistria or something like that. It also has closed borders. However, it can't really enforce that because at its widest length, it is about 500 meters in width. And it's about 40 meters in width at its shortest point. It can't enforce its closed borders because of its smallness. The thing with East Germany is that it had 500 miles of border checkpoints. The reason why the Soviet Union could keep people in is because they had so much time, they had so many miles to stop you from emigrating. Meanwhile, if you had these small dots that are 30 miles in diameter, they wouldn't be able to contain their population. People could just leave, flee, basically through illegal emigration.
right, and this is what Ryan talked about previously, is that the more borders that you have, the easier it is for people to immigrate across those borders, and as a result, as we talked about, that this Transnistria state next to Moldova, thank God that it is separated, right? Because now that they're separated from Moldova is inherently less communist and more free than it would be with those people integrated into their society.
Yep, and it's just a. If you know anything about how it is to traveling from Moscow all the way to Belgium is much, much more difficult than it would be to travel from Bavaria to Alsace. If these were different countries.
Right.
So
another thing he said was that political decentralization and secession takes one monopoly on arbitration and makes many monopolies in arbitration. And he was saying this in a negative way, where it's that's more in the direction of what you'd want, because when it comes to private property, everyone is basically the monopolist on their stuff.
Right.
You basically have a monopoly on your property. So I understand how, just the state of Texas having monopoly on arbitration is still not libertarian per se, but if you had a bunch of different arbitration organizations and there was more of them to choose from, you would have kind of that competition thing. You kind of want more monopolies eventually.
Right.
The thing is, everyone would have a monopoly just over their things. You'd be the monarch of your property, basically.
In a libertarian social order, everyone is a monopolist over the property he owns.
Right. So he was saying secession just creates more monopolies or something, saying that was a bad thing. It was a few minutes ago.
Can you imagine how almost anarchic it would be if every city block in New York City was its own state?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Like, I mean, it wouldn't necessarily be a libertarian social order because they are states, but it would almost be equivalent to a state. Well,
Yeah.
a
And
stateless
whatever
society.
block had the best, proposals or
Policies.
policies. Yeah. I mean, you would see them have the greatest economic growth. People they would have most employment. People would flock there. The competition principle still holds up. Let's just go ahead and finish the video.
Yeah, we're almost done, but they're wrapping up their argument, so it's a good time to talk about them.
His own ideas are directly antagonistic to the belief that smaller secessionist governments and smaller, more numerous states would result in a freer world.
So this is just bring back my analogy. This would be like saying Austrian economics is antagonistic and contradictory because it says that businesses want monopolies while consumers want a free market. It's just yes, it is true that these different groups want different things, but that doesn't contradict anything. So, going on.
Yet Hoppe makes the assumption that secessionist governments are always less oppressive, which simply is not the case in history. Revolutionary Catalonia, for instance, actually managed to be even more oppressive and totalitarian than under Franco's Spain. And one could...
But isn't it better that Revolutionary Catalonia was able to be repressive in one area and then the rest of Spain didn't have to deal with that? Because look what happened when Spain annexed Catalonia. They had communists going throughout the rest of the 20th century just assassinating people and doing terrorist acts and all of that. Meanwhile, if they allowed Revolutionary Catalonia to just exist, none of that would have happened. They could have just built a wall around Catalonia and been like, the communists are over there, we're over here, and that's it.
Right.
So,
could argue North Korea is a secessionist government. Given that we all recognize states have an inherently parasitical relationship with non-state agents, one could only come to the conclusion that an additional state would somehow be exempt from this rule through wishful thinking. Hoppe actually is on the right track in the sense that people will be able to move more easily between more favorable legal jurisdictions. However, he presents this as a consequence of widespread political fragmentation rather than something facilitated by technology. As we have explained,
ceteris paribus, shorter distances are easier to traverse across. I don't understand how they're arguing against this.
Yeah, it's weird.
The possibility of political fragmentation is virtually non-existent, and even if it were not, there is no guarantee that migration would be free. Thus, his observation is still wrong, and any accuracy it does have falls into the category of even a broken clock is right twice a day. Now, on principle, the ethics of secessionism are sound, for the most part. No individual or even political entity ought to be forced into associating with another, and may cut ties for any reason they wish. As a methodology for restoring the natural order, achieving anarchism, it relies on a series of assumptions about the interests and motivations regarding the secessionists that simply does not correspond to reality, such as Hoppe's evident doublethink in regards to competition between states being centralizing and decentralizing. It relies on Hoppe not recognizing the performative contradiction in using and legitimizing political rule to end political rule. I said at the beginning of this part how Marxists use the political process to achieve their ends too. The difference between them and alleged anarchists using politics is that political rule is not only compatible with Marxism, but favorable to it. They're canoeing downstream. Hoppeans, meanwhile, are not only trying to canoe upstream, but trying to dry up the whole damn river by rowing through it. Who do you think is going to be more successful, dear viewer? Unlike a river, which is merely a passive reflection of the laws of physics exerting itself upon H2O, The state will actively facilitate the success of Marxism while inhibiting state-skeptic philosophies from gaining power. Honestly, it's very interesting.
This is basically conflating libertarian centralists with the secessionists. The secessionists are not arguing we're going to take over the federal government and enforce libertarianism on everyone.
Right.
We're going to it's basically using local and state politics to try to use the local or state government's incentives against the federal government.
Right. We're not the Libertarian Party here. We're not trying to take over the government and make everyone free. Not that that's necessarily a bad idea, but he's right. The Marxists are going to have a much easier time than the Libertarian Party ever will, and that's obvious because look at our current situation. But that does not inherently refute the secessionist idea that we can certainly just break away and say we're going to do our own thing.
And when everything is politics, using politics is not a insane strategy or something that is, it's like Rothbard said, a case for right-wing populism. Like, it's just like there are political strategies here, and especially localism and everything else, like local politics and emphasis on everything that is within your grasp is a viable strategy for libertarians. I don't understand why they would think that everything has to be outside the political realm. Now, to be fair, it's not just agorists that are saying this. Like Jeff Dice has been talking about this also, where like an anti-politics is something that that libertarians need to stress. But also, influencing politics in your local areas is a very viable strategy for changing the outcomes right in front of your face. And to ignore that is, I think, a mistake.
And creating the conditions under which secession is possible, right? I mean, because
exactly.
The more independent your local area is, the more likely it is to want to maintain and promote that independence.
Yeah.
Yep.
Interesting how Hoppe recognizes the state as an active force in impairing property rights, but believes it to be passive on the issue of who gets political power and on the issue of secessionism, when there is plenty of evidence to the contrary, much of which Hoppe himself presents. It also relies...
It's not contrary, it's talking about the economic interests of different groups.
Yeah, I fail to see the contradiction. I do. I don't see where it's contrary to itself. It's essentially two different types of arguments. You know what I mean?
Well, it's not two different types of arguments. It's just analyzing two different groups.
Yeah, analyzing two different things. You're right. Yeah.
Yeah. So
relies on historical negationism about the actual driving force behind shifts in the political economy, namely the economics of violence, all to manipulate anarchists into political participation through conflating their self-interest with the state, making them believe there is a political means to achieving their anti-political ends.
So, real quick, the local state has more of your interest in mind than the global state, right?
It's all about compared to what?
Right, exactly. It's all about compared to what, and they're not addressing it, and they won't because they can't.
yeah. So.
And by the way, like when South Carolina seceded from the government in December 20th in 1860, and they drafted up the letter in Charleston that says we're not part of this government. We have no affiliation with the United States federal government. We are to be considered as another nation among the world. We are not part of this state. I wouldn't consider that participating in politics necessarily, like in the way that they're phrasing it.
And it's basically creating new politics, right? A separate set of politics.
Yep. Let me just clarify what I mean by it's two different groups. Yes, he does say that the economic interests of citizens can influence the state, but that's only because the state necessarily gets its power through consent. Or at least implied consent. So this is what Rothbard goes into in Anatomy of the State. This is why the state employs intelligentsia to make all of these like social contract theory type arguments and so on and so forth.
Right. It's not necessarily that everybody is consenting. It's that the state is taking their silence and they're inaction as consent.
Right, and so when people start acting against the state is incentivized to back off because it can't control everyone through force alone. It needs consent, and this movement of people is their obvious non-consent.
Would the repeal of currently existing legislation count as like a state action or something? I mean, like,
Yes, it is. It is politics. Repealing the
NFA or something.
Yeah, the NFA. That's what I was going to. Would be a movement of politics, but would it be unlibertarian?
Nullification itself is a political act, but it is at its root, at least somewhat libertarian.
Right. Yeah. Like a Second Amendment sanctuary thing. Like I was talking about earlier. Like if a local government said we're not enforcing, like if someone got into the White House and said we're confiscating AR-15s, and local officials said we're not enforcing that law, I wouldn't go, man. This is like I wish people just didn't participate in politics like this or something. Like I'd be glad. More or less that they were viewing the larger branch as illegitimate.
Yep. Okay, we got 11 seconds of this video left.
And as we learned from the section on argumentation ethics, to Hoppeanism, a performative contradiction makes a proposition invalid. Speaking of historical negationism,
they're talking about neo-feudalism next. So there is no performative contradiction because you're not performing these things. Like even in their argument, it's not a performance. So they just don't understand what a performative contradiction. I don't know if you want to make any closing.
I think that they're trying to say that the performative contradiction is that you're using, or secession is the antithesis of the movement towards liberty or something like that, and that's just if that's not the case.
Yeah.
Because you're using supposedly state means against the state. That's not a performative contradiction because using state means against the state is inherently anti-state.
Yeah, the state is the first aggressor, and you are just responding.
Yeah,
Right.
Self-defense is not a performative contradiction.
Yeah,
Because-
read no treaty.
Exactly.
Yeah, read no.
Oh, you
treason.
claim to be. Yeah, you claim to be against violence, yet you're like defending your life. Curious.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if we want to make any closing remarks because we basically have made that for the past 10 minutes.
Yeah, basically the second video here is an attempt to show a performative contradiction and therefore refute it using the first video's conclusions, which are based off of a non-understanding of argumentation ethics, and that just makes this video just invalid from the start.
Yeah,
Great point.
They didn't do what they set out to do. So
Yeah. So I gotta go, guys, but you can find me on Twitter at EndDemocracy, and then check out Hoppean.org.
yep.
Awesome.
Okay.
At Yinscap, Hoppean.org.
Yep.
You
We're
can
still
find me-
doing it.
Yep.
You can find me at Neocon Remover, Hoppean.org.
Yep. And I'll see you guys on the other channel in tomorrow night. We're going to be going over the cultural thought of Ludwig von Mises. So that's going to be fun.
All right, it's been fun, guys.
Yep.
Hi, Chin.
Get Hoplu on sometime. So I already spoke to Hoplu, and he wants to respond to this all on his own, and he wants to do it with a select group of people. And he's going to do it after they have released every single video. So
You should have him review our stuff, see what he thinks about our arguments.
yeah, I'll ask him if he watches it. But honestly, this is a really long live stream. So he's going to be doing this for like 8 hours straight at least. He's going to have to I don't know how he's gonna do this in only 8
He may
hours.
just chunk it up and do one video with selective editing.
No, he's gonna do this on a live stream. That's what he said.
Oh God.
Like, I don't know how he's gonna do it, but yeah. Well, not so much just how he's gonna do it, but how is he gonna do it in the 8-hour limit that live streams have on YouTube. Now you can create another stream and just call it part 2, but it would be like, okay, you're gonna go for this for 14 hours? Seriously, dude?
Yeah, crazy.
Yep. Anyways,
All right,